How's going, guys? Welcome to the channel. In this video we are gonna see, what if Naruto became the Dark Empire's blade and built Harem in Star Wars, Part 1. Huge shout out to NeonZangetsu for this story. If you wants to see awesome fanfiction like this, don't forget to subscribe. Now let's get into the video. At long last, the sealing had been completed. Minato gazed down at the wailing newborn in his arms and silently lamented what he'd done. What he'd been forced to do. Naruto, his child, his heir, bawled long and loud to the heavens, and the Kage couldn't help but to wonder if the boy was even declaring his fate. Perhaps he was. Even as he fought to keep the smile on his face, he felt himself slipping, his spirit seeping out of his body as the death god extracted its toll for the price of his heroism. He longed to say something to his son, anything to comfort him somehow, but the words refused to come. For all his will and might, he simply couldn't stave off any longer. He could only smile. His wife Kushina lay in front of him, as they both had been pierced in the stomach protecting their son from one of the Kyuubi's claws. Even now she shed tears for their progeny, his name stitched ever so lovingly into the blankets covering him. He was warm. He was safe. Their chakra was there, inside him, to correct the seal should it ever fail. Minato took heart in that. In a sense, they were still with him. Still there. Still watching over him. They could not, however, stifle his cries. For all his resolve, he couldn't help but feel guilty at what he had done to his baby boy. He denied him a life of normalcy. No one would look at him the same after this night. He knew some people may dislike him, but he wanted to believe they would see him as the little hero he was. He had to. He must. To think otherwise was to die with regret, and that was something he dare not do. In a sense, he'd taken two birds with a single stone by turning his son into a Jinchuriki. He protected his village with one hand and gave his son a power to help fight against the masked man that had wrought this horrible fate with another. Then, something strange occurred. Perhaps it was some side effect of the seal gone wrong, or some other eldritch effect he didn't understand. Whatever the case, it simply happened. Naruto, poor, little Naruto who'd been forced to bear a burden no one should, suddenly found himself surrounded by a strange, swirling vortex. Minato scarcely had time to see it before the bawling babe disappeared. Pop vanished, his mewling cries echoing away on the wind. Just like that. There was no warning, no precedent, no explanation for this sudden phenomenon. His son, and the blankets swaddling him on the altar, were suddenly gone in a burst of golden energy, leaving nothing but empty air and distant sound behind. Then, not even that. Minato's final thought was one of sheer incredulity. Okay. That is bullshit. The Shinigami claimed him and Kushina a heartbeat later, their expressions frozen in disbelief as their bodies fell lifeless and listless. Their souls going to the Shinigami before they so much as struck the ground. Their last breath was their son's name. They would never see him again. From his perch in the tree-line, Obito stifled a furious shout. Damn it all! His lone arm clenched and unclenched, fingers knotting against his palm with enough force to draw blood beneath the glove. It had all gone wrong. Wrong, 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 wrong. He wanted to shout, to spit and snarl, shriek and scream, but he held his silence. Something had gone wrong. Something, had interfered with him. He'd heard a woman's voice, a cheeky, "Oh, I don't think so," whispered in his ear, and then everything had been taken from him, his plot dismantled at the very last instant. Again. Having made one last, desperate attempt to take the Kyuubi, the host, he knew the fault lay with him, regardless of the unexpected interference. Furious with his old teacher, he had tried to grab the boy with his dojutsu and failed. His injuries and the outside intervention proving too much for him to properly grab hold of the whelp for anything more than a split second. Spirits, he didn't even know where he was. He wasn't even entirely certain what had happened. And if his mistake had somehow meddled with the seal, bungled it, somehow, released that energy, who knew where the boy might end up? No! The Kyuubi yowled at its new confines and slammed against its cage, dashing its face into the bars in anger. It too realized that something was wrong, and with every fiber of its being it fought to escape the strange fate befalling it. Jaws snapped at the bars of its cage, claws clanking harshly, but to no avail. Strange tethers of energy sank into its fur, pulling its power away, siphoning it just as its own half had been. But this was no mere sapping of its strength, and it did not cease, pulling more and more of its might, its very hatred from itself, even as it struggled. It roared helplessly as its chakra was ripped from it, its body becoming little more than a shriveled version of itself. Upon the lock of the cage, the piece of paper with the kanji for seal on it flew off and a spiral lock replaced it, closing tightly. Furious and growing weaker by the moment, it did the only thing it could think to do. Perhaps the most spiteful act it could commit. The large mass of chakra flew through the tiny boy's body and lit it an angry, ghastly red from within. Warped it, changed it, altered it, even as space and time twisted around its host. Then it was flung. Somewhere else. Straight into the arms of an empire. Meanwhile, in a galaxy far, far away. If there was a hell in space, it was Mustafar. A scorching lava world comprised of molten magma and a thin crust capable of giving way at any moment, this planet was raw death and despair on an almost primal level. Its very atmosphere was nearly poisonous in its own right, brimming as it did with noxious fumes threatening to choke any who lingered overlong, if a fiery death didn't claim them first. There was no good here, no semblance of kindness or generosity to be found. Only the most cruelly depraved individuals willingly dwelt here of their own volition, and those who escaped their grasp still shuddered at the nightmares. But some craved that darkness. Everything here was steeped in the dark side. It was a evil, a veritable living fire pit, a world only sparsely populated, so corrupted that few dared venture below the clouds. For there was no light. Only dark. Still, Mustafar and its minerals were valuable to the Empire as a whole, and like so many other planets, it served a purpose. Another infinitesimal cog in the machine. One did not simply venture here on a whim. Even in the days of the Clone Wars, the Separatists and the then Republic had chosen not to fight over this inhospitable world, and the darkness within. Darth Vader found it oddly fitting, watching the lava writhe and churn from the throne of his fortress. Watching the lava wind its way endless, still felt the pain now, just as he had when he'd lost his duel to Obi-Wan on that fateful day. This planet had stolen so much from him in the past. His life, his limbs, his strength, Padme, even the promise of a family. But for all it had taken, Mustafar had given Vader something in return. The death of Anakin Skywalker. He had risen from his ashes, reborn. Purpose, focus, will, power personified. He was all of these things and more. Not a whiny brat who thought himself above the galaxy. What a fool he was! Part of him wished he could return to the past if only to give the impudent brat a much-needed thrashing. Skywalker thought he could change his destiny, make the world bend to his whims. Anakin would have raged and shrieked about this place, despising it and wanting nothing more than to be far from this place. Vader knew better. Though he did hate this planet, despised it, loathed it to its very core, this place also granted him a strange, twisted peace. It served as a wellspring for his hatred, a reminder of his wrath even as he worked to hunt the remaining Jedi to extinction. That he dwelt here was something of a blessing in disguise. So that he might never forget, never err, lest he slip. There could be no turning back after what he'd done. Indeed, there was no longer anything to return to, and all this done by his own hand. Thus it was here that he made his sanctum, recently constructed for this purpose. Unbound by the chains of the Jedi Order, unfettered by guilt or remorse, he was free to reach his potential, to fulfill his destiny. For he would bring order and stability to the Empire even if he had to drag it, kicking and screaming. And when the opportunity presented itself, he would take an apprentice of his own and destroy his master for making him into the monster that he was today. It would not be a quick death, this Vader swore. He would take his time with the conniving Emperor, relish the screams of Sidious as he extracted his revenge. He could find purpose in that, at least. Unbidden, his mind flicked back to the credo of the Sith themselves, the very words that guided his actions. Peace is a lie, there is only passion. Through passion, he gained strength. Through strength, he gained power. Through power, so too, did he gain victory. Through victory his chains were broken. And it was there, as he dwelt on the Sith and their chains, that everything changed. Lord Vader! The armored Sith glanced up as a distressed voice intruded on his thoughts. Momentarily nonplussed as a clone trooper darted into his inner sanctum. Fear radiated from the man in waves of palpable tension, and he could see why. His pristine white armor lay covered in scorch marks, burned away entirely in places to expose raw, red flesh beneath. He stumbled, really with a noticeable limp, suggesting he was even more wounded than his armor allowed, and in a great deal of pain from those horrid burns. In short, it looked as though he'd either fallen into one of the lava streams or been horribly burned by someone or something. Vader sympathized. He knew all too well the agony of such things, watching the clone hurriedly abase himself and salute him. "What is it, Captain? We're under attack!" Even as the clone captain spoke, a great quake shook the tower, threatening to send him stumbling away. Vader endured the tremor with ease, rooting himself in place with the force even as he arched a withered eyebrow beneath the suit. A hand involuntarily formed a fist. His blood sang at the thought. A fight was just what he needed. Whomever was fool enough to attack him here in his home had no idea what they were in for. "Do the rebels dare strike at me here?" "No, sir, it is a child." There was a silence. "What? A child?" the captain exclaimed. "We have found a child. I can't explain it, but he's alive." Vader found himself suddenly and intensely grateful for his own mask, because it kept the captain from seeing the look of utter befuddlement he wore. "Interesting. And you say he lives?" A dark hand gestured, beckoning. "Bring him to me." Impossibly, the trooper looked like he wanted to shrink even further into his armor. "We have tried, my lord, but my squad was obliterated to a man." At the deafening silence that filled the meditation chamber, he dared continue. "The boy is merely an infant, but he is impossible to approach. All of them were atomized the moment they came near. I wouldn't have believed it if I hadn't seen it myself, and I barely escaped." Vader's curiosity found itself piqued. "Explain." The captain visibly stiffened as the full weight of the Sith's gaze settled upon him, promising pain if he didn't respond promptly. "It's just that, sir. He's surrounded by a strange, an energy field of some sort, one that destroys or badly burns any who dare get close. We can't do anything to stop it." He stiffened anxiously as the Dark Lord suddenly rose from the throne, his jet-black form descending the stairs in a series of slow, heavy steps. Those black lenses fixed upon him with the burning intensity of 1,000 suns, condemning him for his cowardice. "Very well. I will see to the matter myself." Fear turned to relief in the Force as he swept past, clearing 2 steps at a time. As he made for the door and the chaos outside, his thoughts once more turned inward. It was a shame, really. He'd grown rather accustomed to Rex's unflinching resolve in the past, his refusal to back down, ever willing to fight against impossible odds. Not this fear of the captains and lesser clones. He was still too new to them, a terror in black that most instinctively avoided. Even the commanders were wary of him, uncertain of what to think of this man who wielded a lightsaber like a Jedi, yet clearly was not. What would Rex think of him, if he were to see him now? Perhaps he might yet find him and, no, that was irrelevant. A needless thought, one he dismissed immediately as he waved a hand towards the door controls. He needn't have bothered. Protected as he was by his suit, Vader did not feel the hot rush of Mustafar's atmosphere. Its searing air did not warm his scorched flesh, nor scorch his lungs. He took a moment to gaze up at the cloudy, ash-filled sky, and felt his wrath begin to burn anew. Yes, anger was his strength, his focus. He followed the captain at a brisk pace for several minutes, not yet drawing his saber even when he beheld the ruined bodies of the clones. He simply continued on at his inevitable pace. This close he could hear something that of a strange whine, almost as if the air itself were trying to get away from something. Scarce had he cleared the rise than a red lash of energy arced outward and all hell broke loose. His light saber sprang to life like a genie from a bottle, the brilliant red blade manifesting itself in a flash and interposing itself between its master and the eerie scarlet whip. Vader glimpsed a strange flickery of red in his peripherals, and then it was gone, batted back by his blade. Whatever it was red and it was terribly fast, forcing him to strain against it. "What is this?" Raw wrath spilled out, assaulting him with emotion. Anger. Spite. Hate. Fear. The latter so strong he felt it as if it were his own, a cold fist gripping his guts and squeezing. For a moment he froze, but only a moment. And in that moment, Teehee's strange red energy struck. But Vader was prepared. He caught the tether on his blade and lashed out, cutting down sharply upon the red creature. Not with his blade, but the hilt, driving it sharply against the creature's head. That was all it took for the vicious tether to recoil violently from the blow. A moment's conflict and it was over, the strange presence cowed, retreating rapidly, the strange construct of energy vanishing to reveal the one beneath. And Vader saw. By the Force, how had he gotten here? It was indeed an infant, seemingly only minutes old, wrapped in white cloth. He saw him as much as he felt him. This was indeed the Force, or something so like, so closely in tune with it that he could not tell the difference. That baffling red power, It both intrigued and unsettled him. Such strength in one so young. Such raw emotion. Whatever it was, he bested it. Now he had only to bring his saber down into the mewling babe, and he would be done with this distraction. Couldn't he? Irritated, he shoved the guilt aside. He'd butchered unarmed younglings at the Jedi Temple without batting an eyelash. Surely this would be no different. So what was this hesitation? A glimmer of Skywalker, perhaps? Was he truly that weak? This child was clearly a threat, and if he ever learned to master this power, then he would be a formidable one indeed. Remarkably enough, the choice was made for him. Thanks for that, sir, the clone captain informed him, brisk marching up beside him. I'll be sure to inform the Emperor of what happened here. No. Vader made a split-second decision. Captain? He replied. You will not inform him of this. The clone took a step back, abashed. My lord? Surely you do not plan to ga. Whatever else he might have said died as the Dark Lord casually curled 2 fingers inward, forming a claw with his hand. The unfortunate clone captain had an instant to realize his mistake before the air left his lungs, as though forcibly squeezed out by an invisible fist. His neck followed a heartbeat later with an audible crack. His broken body crashed to the ground in a broken tangle of arms and legs, taking with him the precious secret he'd intended to report. Darth Vader did not laugh at his demise. Instead, he stood there quietly, stiffly, considering. For the boy had stopped crying. Now he looked up at him. Without fear. Through red lenses, Vader beheld the name stitched into the thick clothing sheathing the boy, and his curiosity piqued. Naruto. What manner of name was that? After another moment's consideration, Vader stretched out with the force once more, taking hold of the captain's body and hoisting it into the air. The boy cooed quietly, fascinated by the display. Vader gestured with a dismissive flick of the wrist, and the captain's corpse sailed through the air, landing with a splash into a nearby lava flow. It sank quickly. Within minutes nothing remained. The dark deed done, the Sith returned his gaze to the infant wrapped in swaddling clothes. To the boy who, suddenly, had no fear for him. Something stirred in the blackened pit of his heart. A child here, with such power on Mustafar no less. The very place where he'd lost everything. Against all reason and logic, against his better judgment, and having a very bad feeling about this decision as a whole, the man that had once been Anakin Skywalker felt a touch of sympathy. No, this was too distant to truly be called sympathy. Pity, perhaps? Whatever the case, he reached down. The mewling infant did not protest his presence, nor the heat of the air, or even his bulky arm curling around him. He simply stared at him with those wide blue eyes, quietly peering up at him in mild curiosity. Vader would have taken crying. He would vastly prefer crying any day. But he didn't know what to do with the silence. Then he realized why the boy had been so silent, registered the now damp bundle in his arms. He paused, a scowl tugging at his features behind the mask. For a fleeting instant Vader honestly questioned his own sanity, and wondered if he shouldn't just toss the babe into the lava and be done with it. Because the boy had soiled himself, peed on him. Him, a Dark Lord of the Sith, why the unmitigated gall of that little. Not a heartbeat later, the little lad started laughing. I find your lack of fear disturbing, Darth Vader growled. Impossibly, the boy only laughed ever harder, utterly delighted. It seemed the Force truly possessed a twisted sense of humor, indeed. Exhaling deeply, babe in his arms, he began the long trek back to his castle. Several years later, the blade dwelt in darkness. Every moment passed as an eternity, each second a sliver of infinity, as he waited for the end to come. Deprived of all his critical senses, sight, sound, smell, even the very sensation of touch itself, he was wholly alone within the void. Kneeling, the young man turned his head, silently on edge, awaiting the pivotal moment. He knew the attack would come, but not from where, and thus he waited. Even were he to open his eyes, he would see nothing but blackness, and knew it too. Nothing at all. There was nothing here. Nothing, save the Force itself. Even deprived of all else, he still had his emotions, and he drew power from them. He felt nothing, saw nothing, yet he was aware of everything. This room was his home. He knew its every facet, every aspect of it, even without the Force to aid him. The blade knew and he saw, and in seeing, he was aware. That high, vaunted ceiling overhead, from which an assassin droid might soundlessly drop. The perilous floor beneath his very feet, capable of dropping away at any moment. Electrified walls, waiting to deliver a powerful shock if he strayed too close. Even the air itself was a trap, made thin by some machine to test him. The blade knew it all, and was wholly prepared for it all. Thanks to the darkness. Peace is a lie, there is only passion. Through passion, I gain strength. Through strength, I gain power. Through power, I gain victory. Through victory, my chains are broken. The force shall free me. Even now, he still didn't entirely accept that credo. Hadn't given himself to it completely. Strength came from emotion, and emotion evolved into passion, which led to strength and, eventually, victory. The very idea of suppressing his emotions, as the Jedi were rumored to have done, was an alien one to him. Foreign and distasteful. No, he could not live without his emotions any more than they could him. That much he accepted. But could peace truly be a lie? Was it? His master claimed it was, yet he served the Emperor and by definition the Empire itself to maintain order and stability. Was that not an attempt to create peace? He also served the Empire, and in that way, hoped that he might in some small way repay the man to whom he owed everything. In that way, he found strength and purpose. He was Vader's blade, the blade of the Empire, his weapon, his apprentice. Only knowing his name by sheer happenstance, for it had been stitched into the blanket he'd been found in. Vader seldom called him it these days, but the blade knew. He remembered. Naruto. He much rather preferred his title. He understood he was different and apart from those known as the Inquisitors. They served their own grand purpose and he, his own. They did not answer to him, nor he them. If anything, the servants of the Emperor seemed to disdain him, fear him. Sometimes he wondered if the Emperor himself was actually aware of him at all. Naruto knew not if there was some masterful deception at work here, if he was just a pawn in a game he didn't truly understand. In all honesty, he didn't care. He had a purpose here. He served the greater good through his emotions, even if it annoyed him at times. The attack came without warning. The dark side hissed a warning and the blade jerked his head forward, nearly kissing the stone floor in his haste. Sensation came rushing back as a searing pain made itself known in the back of his neck, a far cry from what would have transpired had he not evaded in time. Even with his hands chained, he was not unarmed. Those who had the force never were. In the instant that it took his opponent to raise their weapon, he'd found his footing and shattered his chains, spinning to face them. In the next instant he roared and lashed out with both hands splayed, funneling the full wrath of the dark side through his palms in a monumental effort. Quite simply, he pushed. A startled grunt greeted him as his opponent flew backward, as though launched from a cannon. There! He grinned. Did you like that? Light and sound returned suddenly, sharply, to the room. An angry, sharp squeal of sundered steel protesting vocally as a humanoid figure struck it, and lay still. The Empire's blade blinked swiftly, struggling to clear the spots from his vision as his eyes adjusted to the unexpected presence of the dim lightning, chest heaving from the abrupt exertion. Blue eyes flickering red. A heartbeat passed, and his attacker made no move to strike at him again, his body slumping slightly against the wall. Then he rose. This creature didn't even have eyes, not truly. All black armor and leather menace, it towered over him, seeming to swallow the room in its sheer shadow. That angular, imposing helm leered down at him in stoic silence, as though daring him to object further. A low, rhythmic breathing arose from deep within the man's, or was it a machine? Chest, the sole sign of life within the cold creature's otherwise blank countenance. If he'd been at all injured by the vicious force push, he did little to show it. As ever, Naruto couldn't help but feel a touch of awe in his master's presence. Nothing seemed to harm him. He was an immutable pillar, utterly unshakable. This was Darth Vader. In a twisted sense of irony, he was the closest thing he had to a parent. Impressive. The Dark Lord rasped as he drew near, igniting his blade. Most impressive. But you are not a Sith yet. And you are still disrespectful. Naruto dropped to a knee, even as he hid an impudent grin. I blame my teacher. Vader could have cut him down then and there. But he didn't. Oh, Naruto knew full well he was towing a dangerous line when it came to his veiled barbs and jabs. But he also knew his limits. Which buttons to press, and not to press. Vader, for instance, did not take kindly to being questioned in public. Nor did he tolerate outright acts of insubordination. Or being called father, for that matter. He had learned this lesson early in his youth and resolved never to repeat that mistake. Besides, he had an inkling of what was coming next, and he daren't speak up again for fear of changing the Dark Lord's mind. You were weak when I found you, but now your hatred has become your strength. At last, the dark side is your ally. A searing heat brushed his right shoulder, followed by his left. Rise, my apprentice! Naruto did as he was bade. Happily. At last. It felt cleansing to finally hear the words. Freeing. As if a terrible weight had been lifted from his shoulders and replaced with a silken mantle of responsibility. Less noticeable perhaps, but by no means lighter. This was one that he was glad to accept. Your training is nearly complete, Vader informed him. It is time for you to face your first true test. Ah. Naruto nearly sighed, then thought better of it. He was to chase rebels, then. They thought they were in the right, poor sods. The Empire's blade saw it the other way around. If one wanted to effect change, the best way to do so was from within, not without. Rebellions only held weight so long as those behind them had the strength, and one needed to spur them onward. From what little he'd seen and heard of them, these rebels lacked that. They thought they could make things different, thought themselves the heroes when in reality, they were only painting themselves the villains in this conflict. He almost pitied them. Almost. What Vader said instead startled him, however. You will be sent to Felicia. It is believed they are sheltering a Jedi known as Shakti. You will capture her and bring her to me. Naruto started. You're serious? Vader's helmet reflected no emotion. If you fail, Admiral Constantine will bombard the planet from orbit to ensure there are no survivors. A cold snake of fear coiled in Naruto's gut. Wait, bombard? He exclaimed aghast. Bombing them would just stiffen their resolve and kill innocents. In that instant, he felt the faintest brush of invisible fingers against his windpipe. Vader had never outright used the Force to choke him before. That is why you will not fail. You will hunt the Jedi down and bring her to me. Alive. Alive? Vader had always been adamant in exterminating Jedi. Yet he knew better than to question him. Still, Naruto found his peerless opinion of his peer had been shaken. Glassing the planet? Vader had just discussed the idea of glassing a fucking planet, as though it were of no concern to him. Surely the Empire didn't stand for that? Surely it had to be better than that. No, it was because Vader trusted in him. That was the reason. The Jedi were evil, he told him this countless times, and they needed to be wiped out lest they spread their hateful teachings to the rest of the galaxy. He was in the right, here. Wasn't he? Yes, Master. In that instant, the Empire's blade made a decision. He would do as he'd been bade. He would hunt her down. His way. By that decision alone, he changed the fate of the entire galaxy. Commander Cody was besieged. With every day spent on Kamino, he found himself assaulted by unspeakable horrors. Nameless terrors which came both day and night, a continuous, ever-shifting, fresh new hell that made his service in the Clone Wars look tame by comparison. All the ammunition in the world wouldn't make a dent in this foe, for it would simply rise again the next day. And should he fail in his task, he knew there would be no mercy for him. He would wish for death, because even that would be a preferable, a blessed release from this hell. Oh, his assignment wasn't something as fearsome as a legion of clankers stalking him down a dark corridor, or disarming a city-killing bomb. Oh no, this task surmounted all others and could be summed up in a single word. Paperwork. The bane of bureaucrats everywhere had finally found him here on the rainy world of his birth, and try as he might, it was simply impossible to escape its grasp. It didn't matter if it had all been digitized and converted to a handheld datapad, there was still an endless amount of the crippling things. Even now as he gazed at it, the numbers seemed to scroll endlessly away before him, stretching on and on. If it wasn't paperwork, it was a new recruit getting smart. If it wasn't a recruit, then it was something else. Always something these days. Bah, to hell with it. Pushing away the infuriating datapad and its infinite list of forms, the aging clone rose from behind his desk and cracked his back. Even that slight motion brought pain, however slight. That worried Cody. It seemed not so long ago he could have easily run laps around half the recruits on Kamino. Now, he had to push himself near and occasionally even beyond his limits to beat them. He was still better than half the graduating class by leaps and bounds, but the gap was shrinking every year, the dogs of age hounding him with every step. Unbidden, his fingers brushed his chin, bristling slightly at the coarse patch of hair there. A beard. He was growing a beard. More of a gray stubble really, but it still grated all the same. In the army, he never would have allowed himself to grow such a thing. For all his arguments to the contrary, he was growing old at a startling rate. A low growl fled from his mouth, his jaw clenching tight in quiet frustration at this thought. He shouldn't be here at all. He should be out there on the front lines, taking the fight to the rebellion. Not trapped here with the whelps. Ironically, there had been a time when he'd wished for nothing more than this, an end to the endless battles of the Clone Wars. A life of peace. Now, this endless paper-pushing made him long to pick up a blaster and get back into the thick of things. Before, when the Jedi were on the side of the Republic. Before the Empire. Before Order 66. Before so many deaths. Now, as one of the few clones still in active service, if you could call it that, he often found himself regulated to training the next generation. These so-called stormtroopers disgusted him. For all his efforts, they were all of them piss-poorly trained sods who couldn't hit a damn target. Proper clones would have put them through their paces all right, but alas, there were so few now. He felt lost, adrift, longing for the glory days when he could simply shoot his problems rather than be forced into an endless dance with paperwork without his armor, without. As if to mock that unfinished thought, his comlink chose that moment to chirp. "Sitspit, what is it this time?" Snatching it off his belt, the aging officer growled into it. "What is it?" He all but bit out the word, fighting a hiss. "Hey, old man." A rough voice greeted him. "Hope you don't mind me dropping in unannounced. Wanted it to be a surprise." Cody blinked, taken aback. He knew that voice. It couldn't be. Could it? "Who is this?" he croaked in disbelief. "How did you get this frequency?" "Simple," came the chipper reply. "Look outside." Distracted by the abrupt suggestion, Cody shut down his comlink and turned his head, directing his gaze to the nearby viewport. One of the few perks of his news station allowed him an office with a view. Not that Kamino had much of one, especially in the rainy season, as the perpetually stormy horizon made it nearly impossible to see more than a few meters. It was enough. Lightning howled and a dark shape cut through the raging skies, making for a nearby landing pad. Abruptly pulled a sharp turn, spinning into a chaotic flyby that carried it perilously close to Cody's window. For a fleeting moment he actually thought the pilot was going to ram headlong into the side of the building, but at the last second it veered off and circled around, engines screaming from the strain. Then, as he looked on in quiet and bemused disbelief, the angular craft coasted neatly to a halt on the very docking bay it had initially angled for. Cody exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Well, that settled it. No one else flew that recklessly. Well, he murmured as he made for the exit. "I'll be damned. The kid actually came back." The whitewashed walls of the training facility registered as little more than a blur as he hastened down the halls. So eager was he to make it to the landing zone that he didn't even bother to be polite to those he passed in the corridors. New recruits and Kaminoans were each elbowed aside in equal measure, shoved away like so much chaff from wheat. Oh, he was certain there would be hell to pay for this later, but at this very moment, Cody simply didn't give two credits about what the people of Topoka City thought of him right now. There was Nala Se now, looking like she very much wanted to talk with him. Well, the damn woman would just have to wait now, wouldn't she? Cody shouldered her out of the way with grim pleasure. "Out of my way, long neck! Impudent oaf!" she shrilled over her shoulder. He was far too thrilled to let the woman's biting retort bother him today, not even pausing to acknowledge the spindly researcher and the imprecations she hurled at his retreating back. By the time her curses had faded, he'd reached the precipice of the landing zone, thinking only to pause before those great transparent doors when he recognized the intensity of the storm outside. Even from this distance, however, he recognized the make and model of the ship. The Fire's Shadow was a heavily modified Imperial frigate. And by frigate, Cody meant it looked as though someone had taken the sharp, overarching lines of traditional craft and visibly enhanced them, sharpened those vicious-looking edges and molded them into a wedge-shaped fighter rather resembling of a curved dagger. If said dagger were bristling with proton torpedoes, turbolasers, and capable of staffing a crew in the upward of a dozen. It was a ship that could slip in and out of systems undetected, yet also capable of holding its own in a firefight. He knew this particular craft well, just as he knew its pilot by that voice, even if the years had changed him. After all, he had lived here for a time. Still, he hadn't seen him in years. In full breath of the storm, he watched the ramp descend, a hooded figure striding out into the rain. Standing at attention, the aging clone nearly saluted, old instinct compelling him. He narrowly caught himself at the last instant, and immediately cursed himself for the slip, trying to ignore the quiet creak in his joints, the ache in his lungs. Another insufferable reminder of his age. Surely he wasn't that old. The door chose that moment to swoosh open, revealing the very object of his thoughts. Still, age or no, Cody found he almost didn't recognize the stranger coming in from the gloom. He remembered a boy who could barely meet his gaze, a sniveling youth dumped at his feet by Lord Vader. Train him, he'd said. Teach him to fight like a soldier. So he had. He'd only spent a few months on Kamino before the Sith thought better of his decision, spiriting him away to never be seen again. That boy had been little more than a raw recruit before he'd left Kamino, stubborn and defiant. Armed with peerless potential perhaps, but untrained. The lad had been hurting even then, and Cody had done his best to try and provide what little comfort he could for the stubborn, argumentative child. The young man standing before him now was none of those things. Throwing back his hood, confident blue eyes blazed out at him from that familiar, whiskered face. As Cody met his gaze, those eerie orbs seemed nearly gold for a fleeting heartbeat, only to pass as he looked at the boy head-on. No, not a boy, he reminded himself. He'd traded in the dirty rags of his youth for a sweeping black cloak not unlike that of his master, but that was where the resemblance ended. Cody found he was rather glad of it, for some strange reason he could not quite bring himself to understand, but relieved all the same. He was his own person. Rather than copy the Dark Lord's imposing and towering suit, the apprentice had instead opted for light armor rather reminiscent of Cody's own days in the Clone Wars, albeit heavily modified. The right pauldron seemed to gleam a strange silver color, but beyond that the rest were stained the darkest of ebony, right down to the pristine boots. Those twin hilts clipped at his belt served as a stark reminder that, whatever he'd been once, he was now a warrior, trained in the ways of the Force. Well, at least he wasn't wielding that absurd spinning gizmo favored by those damn Inquisitors. The thought of those ghastly beings brought forth a chill to Cody's old bones. For a fleeting moment, he wondered if the boy had become just like them, cold and indifferent, taking delight in the suffering of others. Cody! No, that smile was all Naruto. Umph! The old clone croaked in surprise as the robed stranger darted forward at near explosive speed. Then he found himself caught up in a crushing bear hug and lifted upright, arms pinned at his sides. Cody grunted, and the young Sith must have taken that as a bad sign, because he quickly released the aging commander and lowered him back to the floor, though not without a wry grin of his own. Damn! The blonde laughed, pulling away. You got old. Taking a moment to massage his aching ribs, Cody shot him a look. So did you, kid, he managed eloquently. I really wasn't expecting you. Naruto's face screwed up at that, as though he'd bitten into something incredibly sour. Thought I told you to stop calling me a kid, Cody. Sorry. Old habits. Just like you. Hey! Despite himself, Cody laughed. It felt good to trade barbs with the boy again, even if he was no longer a child. Reminded him of the old glory days, it did. Back when his loyalty, his faith to the Republic, to the Empire, was unshakable. Before gnawing guilt and questions had left him a hollow shell of a man. By the void, it felt good to actually talk to someone again, someone who understood. Spirits, he'd gotten tall. Well, don't just stand there. Wrapping an arm around the young man's shoulder, he ushered him inside. You're soaking wet. Let's get a cup of kaffe and talk. Naruto, to his credit, didn't decline. He merely inclined his head in acknowledgement, and did as he was bade, trailing after him to the mess. Cody's mad dash to the landing pad had cleared the halls of traffic somewhat. Those few they passed in the halls gave them a wide berth. Some, on occasion, paused to stare. He wasn't under the illusion that they were completely wary of him. Rather, the subtle presence of the robed, armored warrior beside him and the noticeable hilts at his belt. He wondered if they thought him a Jedi. Naruto, of course, wasn't. The Jedi were gone. A faded memory in the eye of the galaxy. That thought brought with it a fresh pang of guilt. It had been so easy to follow the order at the time, but afterward doubt nagged at him. Good soldiers followed orders, and he'd done so without thought when Order 66 was handed down. Obeyed without hesitation, but at what cost? It haunted him. It still did. They passed another batch of stormtroopers just as they reached the doors leading to the cafeteria. Most of them were wise enough to keep them at arm's length. Sadly, not all held that nugget of wisdom. One, a dark-haired, angular-faced man with a prominent brow and piercing gray eyes, took it upon himself to deliberately jostle shoulders with the Force wielder, stopping him cold. Watch it! He knew this one, just as he knew the rest. Mercer Fry, the son of an important bureaucrat. Naruto's blue eyes burned gold, and Cody froze. He half expected the blonde to snap, to lash out at Mercer for such blatant disrespect, to cut him into pieces with a lightsaber in recompense for his temerity. The very air around him suddenly felt charged, ready to lash out at the slightest provocation. Mercer must have realized it too, because the brash trooper paled and drew back half a step, his tan visage going pale as the Sith turned to face him, and smiled, stepping aside. "Have a pleasant day." Mercer all but bolted from the mess. Naruto took all this in with a weather eye. "Not very smart, that one," he remarked as they faded out of earshot. Cody exhaled a breath he hadn't even realized he'd been holding. "I'm surprised you didn't kill him, honestly." Kill him? Why?" Naruto laughed, as though the idea had only just occurred to him. "Cody, if I cut down every soul who offended me, everyone who possibly bore me ill will, the galaxy would be an empty place indeed." "No." He shook his head, watching Mercer's rapidly retreating form recede into the distance. "There's no need for it. I think he'll carry this moment with him for the rest of his life." There was something strangely broken about that smile, but before Cody could think to question it, the look vanished. "Besides," he continued with an air of faux joviality, "it's not like they're all that rotten." The commander made a squelching sound as they each retrieved a cup of caf from the mess sergeant. "Well, not as rotten as Mercer, but—" Naruto arched an eyebrow. "That bad? That bad? Well," the apprentice shrugged as he pulled up a seat across a nearby table. "You can hand a man a blaster, but you can't make him aim." "True." Cody relented, sliding into the seat opposite him, mug in hand. "So, what brings you here?" "I'm here for you, actually," Naruto confessed, lowering his voice. "I was hoping you could help me with something." "Anything, kid. Just say the word." The slightest beat of silence passed between them, and the whiskered warrior seemed to shrink in on himself. "Vader has assigned me to capture a Jedi," he admitted quietly. "And I'm afraid." A cold dagger of dread stabbed Cody in the heart. Jedi. He'd been under the impression that they were all but extinct, all slain in the Great Purge. The idea that one still lived roused unpleasant, worrying feelings in his heart. And the kid was going to capture one. He wasn't sure how that made him feel. Relief that they still lived? Relief that they were being taken alive? Or shame for what he viewed as his own traitorous actions on that day? Try as he might, he couldn't find an answer. "Are you sure this is the place to talk about this?" "It's the perfect place." The blonde dismissed his concerns with a wave. "The noise masks everything. But look, I'll be honest. I need you on this. And before you ask, Vader never said I couldn't take on my own squad. He didn't even give me a time limit to complete this mission. Bastard hogs the 501st to himself, though. So, you're looking for backup." Cody finished, sighing. "Clones are better than stormtroopers any day." The blonde agreed readily. "I've never fought a Jedi before. I'm not so stupid as to assume they'll play fair." Poor kid. If only he knew the truth. Jedi were honorable beings, the very antithesis of what Naruto mistakenly thought them to be. Those noble warriors did not take hostages, did not lie or cheat, or even steal to accomplish their goals. They lived to help others. One of them had even been a good friend. Or so he had thought once. "Sure, I can round up a few," he agreed, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "You'll be leading them, of course." Cody promptly spit out his caf. "Excuse me? I said you'll be leading them, of course," Naruto repeated glibly as he leaned forward on the palms of his hands, a roguish grin affixed to his whiskered face. "What, you don't think I came all the way out to the boonies just for some random men, did you? With you leading them, hopefully we can do this right, and not lose anyone." Ah, there it was again. Overwhelming might or not. Naruto could be so damn naive sometimes. He respected and even now sometimes feared Lord Vader, of course, but given a choice he preferred the man's protege by leaps and bounds. Even after all his grueling training, Naruto still wasn't the sort to recklessly endanger innocent lives, certainly not without cause. He rather reminded him of another Jedi, one he remembered serving fondly. There was even something of his fighting style there if one were to look closely enough, in the broad sweeps and the sure footing, ever making use of his superior reach and stride to dominate the flow of battle and by definition, his enemies. It reminded him of General Skywalker. But the one to teach Naruto had been none other than Darth Vader. The same man who showed unusual kindness to clones, just as Anakin once had. Even if he knew next to nothing about what the Jedi were really, truly like. Now that raised a rather niggling suspicion in Cody's mind, a dark, Treacherous thought he seldom entertained even in his darker moments. Could Anakin Skywalker and Darth Vader be one and the same? He knew admittedly very little concerning the Sith and Jedi as a whole, but the secrets were there, ripe for the taking if one looked closely enough. Not that he'd ever voiced this suspicion aloud. The last clone to make such a comparison to Lord Vader had gotten himself assigned to a backwater world on the Outer Rim. Needless to say, they had never heard from him again. Thus, once again, he tactfully chose to ignore it. So? Naruto's voice cut into his interlude. What do you say? Ready to get back into the fight? I can get you back to 100% in no time. Ah. So that was his game, eh? More than anything, Cody longed for that. Knowing Naruto, he was just as good as his word. With that, the hook was well and truly baited for the old commander. All right, you win. The words escaped him almost before he knew it. But it was ultimately of his own volition that he reached out and extended his hand to the smug blonde. But you'd better damn well listen to me instead of charging off half-cocked like you usually do. Deal! Naruto beamed, downing his drink and clasping his hand in one smooth motion. Just pick out 10 good guys and… Whatever else he might have said died as he turned and beheld a long, slender figure making storming their way towards them. Even from this distance, and with his fraying vision, Cody easily ascertained the Kaminoan's identity. Fortunately, Naruto didn't have such poor luck. His expression remained one of reserved curiosity, as the sea of recruits and troopers parted in the mess to make way for the enraged woman. Watching her with all the fierce intention of a hawk, the young Force user slowly stood, positioning himself so that he would be squarely between them. Friend of yours? He posited. No. Cody sighed, climbing to his feet with an effort. Not in the least. Ah. Funny how one sound could convey such distaste. I don't have to be nice to her then. In hindsight, Cody felt like kicking himself. Really, he should have known. Should he realize sooner that the wizened old woman would find a way to make his life a living hell one last time. He just hadn't anticipated her having the gall to confront the apprentice of Darth Vader so openly. She had to be well and absolutely furious with him to simply wade into the mess like this. Judging by the strained grimace the blonde had just adopted, he was experienced the full breadth of that emotion now. Nalase was visibly bristling by the time she reached them, practically shaking with indignant wrath. Cody knew that look. You! She demanded, thrusting a spindly finger at the blonde before he could speak to defend him. Boy! How did you get in here? Why have you distracted this clone from his training duties? Naruto turned up his head, the better by which to look the Kaminoan in the eye. I suggest you rephrase those words, madam. The weathered commander started visibly. Well, that was new. For a heartbeat there, he'd almost sounded like his master. I've come to commandeer some of your men on a critical mission for the sake of the Empire, he replied pleasantly. Commander Cody will lead them. Cody didn't expect Nalase to let him go without a fight. She viewed every clone as the personal property of Kamino and guarded them jealously. And she didn't it. This clone, she emphasized the word with a hiss, is property of Kamino. He is going nowhere without authorization. Certainly not with some upstart. All right, I'll just take Cody for now, then. No! Nalase raged. Absolutely not. Naruto shrugged. You can protest all you want, but my word is final. I will protest. You cannot simply waltz in and… Is that your final answer, my lady? It is indeed, whelp. Naruto sighed. Pity. Then he pinched his thumb and forefinger together. If Cody hadn't been looking right at him, he wouldn't have seen it. It was the first outright display of violence he'd seen from him in ages. As if a switch had been flipped, Naruto vanished and something else took his place. As he looked on, the slender alien started violently, spindly hands flying to her throat as though to fend off an unseen hand. Forcibly strangled by this invisible fist, her smooth voice trailed off into a raspy cough, then a wheeze as the air rushed from her lungs. Silver eyes bulged against black as she scratched at the vice slowly killing her, to no avail. Naruto simply squeezed tighter. I find your lack of faith disturbing. The blonde hummed, the words dripping with false sweetness and subtle menace. Cody's a loyal soldier of the Empire. He fought and bled for it. What did you do? Nothing. Yet for the pettiest of reasons, you blockade me from my duty. His voice darkened, as she struggled, furiously clawing at her throat. And for what? He scoffed at her angrily. Not out logic or even a reason, but out of petty spite because someone once told you the same words to you. You mistake me, Nalase. You cannot hide your feelings from me, and I am no Jedi. Incredibly, he released her then, allowing the aggravated researcher precious air. Slumping forward, Nalase clutched at her freed throat, her forehead scraping the ground, almost as if she were bowing. She was, Cody realized. I'm sorry, my lord, she croaked, her voice little more than a strained whisper. I didn't know it was you. Well, now you do, and we can put all this unpleasantness behind us. When Naruto next he spoke, he was very much back to his old, cheerful self. This is not a request, it is a command. As the Empire's blade, I do so hereby reinstate Commander Cody to his former rank, armor, and all the privileges granted therein. He will work alongside me for the duration of my mission, and you. Nalase flinched. Will bugger off. Naruto finished, stepping over her prone form. After a moment's hesitation, Cody followed, sparing one final glance for the fallen researcher. Then he followed the bemused blonde out of the mess and towards the landing pad. Why didn't you do that sooner? He muttered. The apprentice flashed him a grin. You didn't ask? Felicia. Maris Brood was afraid. Deep in the fungal forests of Felicia, sheltered by miles of vegetation and dozens of Felician warriors willing to die for her alongside her master, no less, she shouldn't have felt such fear. She should have been calm and at peace, one with the Force in all its entirety. But the Padawan felt none of these things, only the crushing realization that her precious sanctuary was about to come crashing down around her ears. By the end of this day she would have vengeance, or she would have death. So much for the vaunted Jedi Code. Where was it when she needed it most? Words, that's all it was. There is no emotion, there is peace. She recited it to herself like a mantra, desperately trying to stave off the anxiety. There is no ignorance, there is knowledge. There is no passion, there is serenity. There is no chaos, there is harmony. There is no death, there is the Force. And yet there was emotion. There was hatred. There was sorrow. There was fear. Terror gripped her heart in an icy vice and gave an awful squeeze, threatening to choke her where she stood. Fear. It was everywhere, only thinly masked. Fear of dying, fear of being the last Jedi, fear of the unknown. So much fear that she scarcely knew what to do so with or herself. Even now she could imagine that dread specter falling out of the sky with its crimson blade, feel the burning red brand against her flesh. Could she stand against such a foe? Did she have the strength to prevail? Would she? Or was she destined to die here? The very thought of it made her horns ache. Even the sky itself looked to have turned against them. Dark clouds loomed overhead, carrying with them the promise of rain. Thunder rumbled through the heavens, flickers of lightning dancing in their depths. Anger vied with fear, fight or flight, and she found herself torn. Torn between the need to extract vengeance against the Sith responsible for massacring her order, and the need to get out of here to run. Because this was bad, this was bad, this was very bad, and she had a horrible feeling about all of this. Shakti felt no such fear. Indeed, when Maris risked a glance at her master she sensed nothing but quiet serenity, a beacon of calm in the Force. She was not frightened by the coming storm. If anything, she seemed to embrace it, allowing the dark side to wash over her and remain unaffected, untainted. How did she do it? How could she remain so calm? More than anything, she envied her master such tranquility, a peace she could not seem to acquire. What did the old code matter now that they were the last of the Jedi? All of her life she had been taught not to feel emotion, and for what? Nothing. Because he was here. Because he was coming for them. An angry, tainted presence, looming in the Force. Worse still, was the ship. She saw the vessel on the horizon, a dark shape large enough to see, a curved one-man craft strafing across the sky. A heavily modified TIE fighter, the piercing whine of its engines a never-ending shriek that carried on and on and on, pitching endlessly in an agonizing cry that hurt, clenching her teeth, one that made her very skin crawl. She sensed the ship's pilot was strong with the Force and the dark side, looking on helplessly as he deliberately took time in landing, circling twice before setting down in a nearby grove, intentions clear. They wanted to be seen. They longed to be known. They needed to be feared. They ached to butcher them, cut them down like dogs. Master! She ventured warily, suddenly dreading the silence of her own thoughts, and the ghastly images her imagination conveyed. Do you feel that? I sense it too. Assassins. Darth Vader has found us? That was all she could think to utter. She sounded far braver than she felt. Perhaps. Her master conceded after a moment's contemplation. Maris. she continued, rising to her feet in a smooth movement. Gather your belongings and go into hiding just as we've practiced. Do not return until I've summoned you. But I. Shakti held up a hand, forestalling her protest. You will be no match for a Sith. You'd surely be captured or worse, killed. Damn it! She cried in a sudden explosion of anger, unable to stand it any longer. I can't just leave you two. In that instant, she also felt something else. Further away, not quite distant, but neither close, approaching at incredible speed. This presence was far stronger than the last, going so far as to utterly eclipse it. Whomever they were closing fast, well near to overtaking the first intruder. She wasn't sure if that was something to applaud, or something to fear. Stretching out her senses, she struggled to contemplate the newcomer. It felt dark, but unlike the other presence, she thought she glimpsed light within. Muted, faint but present. Like a fire casting faint shadows on those who sought solace within its warmth, so too did this strange aura draw her in. There was eagerness there to be, but an eerie sense of fear as well. She almost dared to hope. Another Jedi? It certainly didn't feel like anyone she knew, but the sensation was there, and she found herself reaching out to it. What are you? A flicker of surprise jolted her, then she thought she felt a smile on the currents of the Force. It carried with it a response. A vision, a flash of blue. Something new. And the link broke. Another? Shakti was murmuring as Maris came back to herself abruptly, a note of genuine concern in her voice. It seemed she hadn't noticed her brief foray into the mind of their enemy, or if she had, she didn't give it any mention. This is unexpected. Maris, you must leave. Now. Oddly enough, this dismissal only strengthened her resolve. No! She bit out in a fit of pique, her temper getting the best of her. If there are two of them, I should be here. I won't leave you here to die. She expected Master T to shut her down, to be firmly but gently denied. Remarkably, something in that stern face softened. Very well. But stay close to me. Warm pride flushed her cheeks. I won't let you down! She had no way of knowing just how close she was to falling, nor just what had taken notice of her. Several minutes earlier, Felicia was glorious. Even as the fire shadow emerged from space, even as the lines of infinity bouncing back to reveal stars, Naruto could feel it in his very bones. Something in this world spoke to him, as if it were a piece of himself that he'd lost, but never realized until now. As if he'd been on a long journey and only just come home. It was a world thrumming with sheer vitality. A planet teeming with life and vibrant energy on an almost primordial scale. It shone in the Force like a burning beacon. Merely being in its presence filled Naruto with a strange sense of peace he'd never known before, and he hadn't even landed yet. Great trees and fungus grew everywhere he looked, a thriving canopy that welcomed him with open arms. The Force itself felt almost alive here, wild and fierce, reaching out to enfold him in the softest whispers of curiosity and reassurance. What are you? Gentle laughter trickled through the air, hands splayed against his back. The fullness of her body pressing against him, every curve welded to his own. Lips brushing his ear, tempting, teasing. A warm voice like molten honey flowing through his thoughts and mingling with the heady scene of the jungle. A whisper. Find me. Naruto blinked rapidly, the abrupt and unexpected vision dissipating as quickly as it had come. What manner of Force vision was that? For a sliver of a second he thought he felt something there, a muted presence reaching out to brush against his mind. Whatever it was, it recoiled with a jolt at his instinctual reply. It slithered away before he could fully comprehend it, ealing through his fingers, leaving him wondering if it had been there at all. His imagination? Shaking his head, the blonde returned his gaze to the viewport. So, what do you think? He asked of the pilot. Worth it? Well, that depends, came the reply. Depends on what? Depends on how good you are with those sabers of yours. The retort was so unexpectedly that he actually barked a laugh. Damn, I missed working with you, Commander. You're never going to let that go, are you? They groused, guiding the ship into the atmosphere. Nope. Not in a million years. You know. Cody's helmeted head turned to face him as the chair spun, his expression inscrutable beneath the faceless helm. It was only the levity of his voice that lent any hint as to how he truly felt. I forgot what an insufferable little shit you could be. You're like a rancor with a bone. Guilty as charged. The apprentice bowed. Oh, and Cody? Good to have you back. Good to be back. On that much they agreed. It felt damn good to be back in his armor again, after all these years. Even if it was a bit snug in places. Naruto had been true to his word, however, and promptly put him under anesthesia once they were en route to Felicia. Whatever the procedure, whatever strange, eldritch ritual he'd concocted in that mind of his, it had worked. More than that. Once he'd been roused, it had only taken a few hours to see the difference. The white and gray was gone from his hair, the wrinkles faded to mere creases. His joints no longer ached. He could remember everything with near-perfect clarity. His aim was steady and true, just as it had always been. He didn't know how he'd done it, and considering the scope of his new powers frankly, he didn't want to know. Whether he'd used some complex medical device or outright resorted to siphoning life from another human being and channeled it into him. No, he didn't want to think of it. He'd asked and Naruto had kindly told him not to do so again. What mattered was that it had worked. He felt like a soldier again, not some old, graying relic locked away to be forgotten. Call it willful ignorance if you will, but some doors were best left unopened. Some secrets remained as such. Well then, Naruto declared suddenly, clapping his hands together and startling the commander from his resolve. Have fun with the ship! I'll meet you down there! Cody had just enough time to see the Sith make for the cargo bay, and another second to realize what he intended. Wait, what are you doing? Kid? Kid? A rush of air was his only answer. Geronimo! Then, with a demented cackle, the Sith flung himself down the ramp and leaped out into open air in a wild free fall. Without a chute. A streak of fire heralded his rapid descent, and then he was gone from the viewport, crashing through the trees and laughing all the way. Now, if Cody had been a sane man, he would have turned the ship around right then and there. He fulfilled his end of the bargain and brought the blonde to Felicia, so really, he didn't owe him anything more than this. A rational man would have deemed his duty done and gotten the hell away from this crazy bastard. Alas, Cody had never been one for sanity. Resigning himself for the long haul, he angled the fire shadow towards a relatively sturdy-looking fungus tree. Well, that settled things. He'd lost his damn mind. Deeper within the jungle. It was a very nice landing, all things considered. He'd only destroyed a handful of trees before managing to stop himself, carving a burned swathe of charred ground into the forest. Even with his armor, he thanked the Force for regeneration. He felt Shakti as a burning blue beacon in the Force, as stern and unmovable as a rigid pillar. And there beside her another presence, more fearful and angry. A Padawan? Here? He would have found it funny, were it not for the third presence looming over them like a shadow. For there, far too close to them for his liking, he found the fifth brother. By contrast, the Inquisitor was a dark spot, a blight on the planet's very existence. Tainted. Oddly enough, Naruto's first reaction wasn't one of fury. Annoyance perhaps, but not anger. He should have known one of the Inquisitors would get wind of his mission and try to beat him here. Try to steal his prey. Now that did anger him. Greedy fools. They were vultures, always circling, always waiting for an opportunity. They'd become even more ambitious since the death of the Grand Inquisitor not long ago, and now, it seemed one of them had grown bold enough to venture into one of his hunts. If those one thought he could get away with it, he was sorely mistaken. He'd never liked Inquisitors. They seemed to take a foul sort of pleasure in flaunting their power over the weak and the helpless, using their strength to dominate others. Even the seventh sister, who was only marginally more likable than her kin and somewhat friendly to him, fell victim to this crutch. When you had power, it was easy to abuse it, to lord it over others. Naruto knew better. Sometimes it was the weak who decided the fate of a galaxy. Those you abuse today might yet stab you in the back tomorrow. He knew. He had been weak from the beginning. He'd shouted and scratched and scraped and slashed his way to power, and he was content with his station. Just as he was content with his lightsabers. He called them to his hands now as the undergrowth rustled and shook, a sure sign that his violent descent into the forest hadn't gone unnoticed. Sure enough, he sensed a troop of warriors headed in his direction, no doubt diverted to slow him down. Their numbers were rather sizable. Their funeral. And here we go. He sighed, thumbing the release. An electric snap hiss greeted his ears as the twin, amber blades snarled to life, identical bars the color of the brightest sunset rising between him and the onrushing enemy. Rather than follow the oversized, bulky design of his master's weapon, which even Vader believed was inelegant to the point of being ungainly, Naruto had opted to follow the make of one Vader's predecessors. rather, that of a man long since dead. He'd chosen to adopt a curved hilt lightsaber, also called the dueling lightsaber, a design employed by Dooku, the Count of Sereno, former Jedi Master, the man who became Darth Tyrannus. The use of curved hilts allowed for more precise movements, as well as near-perfect flexibility when engaged in lightsaber-to-lightsaber combat. It was also more complex and gave the creator of such a hilt more of a challenge in aligning its crystals, as well as requiring a minor variation in holding the grip. Curved hilts needed to be held more in the palm, farther away from the fingertips. The hilt's curvature also gave the wielder more power when delivering overhand strikes and would change the angle of the attacks by the merest fraction of a degree. This was usually just enough to confuse and disorient an unsuspecting opponent. Some techniques were more difficult when using a curved hilt, but many others became far more effective. The hilt design was not limited to Form 2. Its advantages in dueling carried over to every form. Unfortunately, curved hilt lightsabers were generally more difficult to use in blaster bolt deflection. However, Naruto had discovered that the nature of the curved hilts actually fit more comfortably with a preference for the Shuren-style reversed grip. Naruto had crafted himself a pair of the blades which produced a brightly lit, 16-inch long, plasma energy blade, the blade being amber in color. And seeing as lightsabers had a 360-degree cutting surface, the blade had a cone-shaped point rather than a rounded tip the way Jedi's did, to aid in the penetration of thrust-based attacks. The weapon's solid, heavy-duty, yet thin hilts, which if they were straight as with most lightsaber designs, would be exposed as being 28 centimeters long and 5 centimeters wide, favored maximum strength and were built for power with a metallic casing of nigh-indestructible frick alloy. They'd also been given a manganese brass radiator casing, a treatment that prevents corrosion around the saber's traditional internal components. They utilized a high-output diacium power cell, a synth crystal as the focusing crystal, and the lightsaber's solid casing was for maximum protection against power surge deterioration, as well as having field energizers to give the sabers stronger and more reliable blades, and featured a quick recharge plug along with it having a bifurcating cyclical ignition pulse to allow them to operate underwater. Naruto liked to believe in being prepared, paranoid as it might seem. Not only that, but as paired lightsabers, the two weapons could be joined together at the hilt with fiber cord to function as a saber staff. Alas, due to the curved form of the handle, it was somewhat more difficult to wield than he would have liked. As for the crystal within them, they utilized synthetic lightsaber crystals, commonly referred to as a synth crystal, a type of lightsaber crystal that was artificially created, rather than naturally formed by geological processes. Due to the methods used in their creation, they weren't the pure, blood red of most Sith, though they could be made with any color through special manipulations of either the creation process or the crystal itself, often through the Force. Well, here we go. It was to the Force which he gave himself now, closing his eyes and plunging into the dark side as the forest erupted into a sea of blue bodies. When next they opened, those gentle blue orbs were nowhere to be seen, replaced by the burning yellow eyes of the Sith. He ceased restraining himself. Reason faded and the rage rushed in. With it came release, sweet, blessed release. One of the first Felucians to reach him yelped as a towering trunk abruptly bisected his path, crushing him and his warband to red paste upon the spongy ground. The rest proved themselves slightly more fortunate in that they were able to evade the first plight of their fellows. They did not escape the second. His blade gestured and the world shook as though an invisible hammer had descended upon it, cratering the earth like clay and crashing through all in its path. Those that survived found themselves subjected to further horrors. Deactivating a blade, he latched onto the nearest Felucian he could find and yanked with the full might of the Force, hauling the startled alien off its feet before cannoning him back into his fellows. A savage bolt of Force energy rendered the poor fellows insensate, and another ensured many a warrior would never see another sunrise. Their leader quivered once, cried out in a growl, and was still. Naruto didn't bother to wait, tossing the broken body aside into one of his attackers before reactivating the blade and flinging himself into the fray. What followed next was little more than a scorched blur. This close to the enemy and with so many, there was no room for any of his more precise attacks, and with so many bodies pressing in around him, it was nearly impossible to attack with anything resembling precision. They tried to stop him, tried to slow him, and thus, he abandoned all attempts at precision altogether. Great arcs of lighting leaped from foe to foe as his blades scissored through the teeming masses. There was no time for thought, only instinct, only emotion, only passion. And with passion came power. He fought, slashed, and killed as he never had ever done in his life. He fought until his vision burned a raw red and his nose filled with the scent of scorched flesh, some his own, some that of the enemy, and then kept fighting, breaking necks, snapping bones, always killing, crushing, dismembering, eviscerating. Rational thought ceased to be, replaced only by the blinding urge to crush, to destroy, to make sure not a single soul left this place alive. He ceased to think, to reason, and cared for only one thing: death. Force-enhanced reflexes carried him through the jungle like a bloody wraith. Whomever he touched perished on the stop, be it through blade or bolt, or simply being crushed through sheer force of will. Within those first few seconds he'd slaughtered nearly 4 dozen of the enemy force on his own, and countless more had fallen to lighting, others, brutal crosscuts from his blazing blades, neck crushed into pulp. In the back of his mind, Naruto began to understand just how easily Darth Vader must have laid waste to most of the Jedi army by himself so long ago. It was the dark side. Even here in the thick murk of so many, everything seemed to move in slow motion. With his power, he could do anything. Everything. Even the most glancing of blows fueled him, lent more strength to his body. Strong with the Force though they might be, the natives were little more than amateurs when it came down to finesse. They didn't know the power of the dark side. Their moves were painfully obvious to any trained adept. To Naruto, they telegraphed their intentions long before they'd even attacked. But it wasn't enough. The dark side urged him on further, spurring him into an unholy frenzy, fueling him with every moment. Clubs made of sharpened bones slammed down against his armored body and bounced away, their owners crying out with fear as he shouldered even their mightiest blows. And he took full advantage of that fear. The sharpest bit of honed bone yet shot past in the form of a flung dagger, opening his cheek and momentarily breaking him out of his berserker fury. Scoffing, he made a fist and crushed the rogue's chest, then flung a saber into another before kicking him, shrieking, into his fellows. The ensuing shrieks that followed after was not as satisfying as he'd hoped. Was this all Shakti had to offer? She hadn't even deigned to train these warriors properly. They were trying to kill him with sticks, for crying out loud. Then a bull ranker charged out from the undergrowth, bearing a Felucian rider on his back, and his opinion changed. Oh, he managed eloquently. Naruto's rage well and truly abandoned him then, appreciation for the massive beast rearing its head while simultaneously warring with wariness at its sudden appearance. To say that it towered over him would have been a colossal understatement. Larger than most rancor, it could have easily devoured him in a single gulp. This wasn't something he could simply hack apart with sheer tenacity, not without perishing in the process. Worse, its rider commanded an intelligence the beast lacked, and brought it down upon him with a string of gibberish. The creature caught his scent and roared, its maw splitting wide. It was only just beginning to descend on him when he lashed out with force lighting. His hands snapped up, clenched into claws, and thousands of jagged bolts cascaded forward into the beast as one, sending its thick body into spasms of agony alongside its rider. Sparks scrawled up and down its hide, and although its eyes burned a bright white as though lit from within, the battered blonde didn't relent. Impossibly, the beast was still alive. Even now he could see it struggling, fighting to approach him and gore him. Such strength! A pity it was a wild beast, else he would have liked to tame it. Ah well, beggars couldn't be choosers. With a roar and a final surge he hurled the beast away and out of the forest, while flinging its rider down at his feet. Despite his best efforts to the contrary, Naruto felt himself sighing at the Felucian's hopeless expression. He raised a hand, fingers splayed. "Go on," he coached. "Get out of here." To his disbelief, the warrior actually lunged at him with a warbling shriek. What kind of loyalty was this to inspire one beyond hope? Though the bone dagger grated harmlessly against his armored shoulder, Naruto felt his temper peak and lashed out with the force, sending the warrior crashing through the brush and out of the forest. The blonde shouldered his way through after him, and finally broke through the barrier of leaves and brambles at long last, crashing past the last of the jungle to the sound of crashing sabers and an open clearing upon an embankment. Well, well, well. It was indeed the fifth brother who'd beaten him here, he discovered, and it came as a pleasant surprise to see that he was being beaten with an inch of his life. Handily at that. He struck and parried frantically as blurs of green and blue spun about him in an endless dance, saber spinning wildly whilst he struggled to ward off his attackers. A fierce pleasure welled up in Naruto at the sight of his struggling. Had he perhaps approached him and asked for his help rather than snuck, he might have been willing to be the better man and lend a hand. As things stood now, he wondered if he shouldn't just let them kill him. He was starting to wonder if that made him a good Sith. A sharp riposte thrust the Inquisitor on his back foot, and in the lull he glimpsed the red-white visage of a Togrutan female. Well, this, then, must be Shakti. This was a true Jedi Master, leagues above the training droids he'd battled high in the skies of Bespin and in the darkened slums of Coruscant. A warrior incarnate, power personified. There was a certain regal grace to the way she moved, each step was measured, calculated. Not a single movement wasted. A young Zabrak woman hung back from the fight, darting in to strike at that Inquisitor's flank, seeming to vanish whenever he lashed out at her directly. Her Padawan, no doubt, though the pale girl's name escaped him. One could clearly see that he'd been fighting them both for some time now, and he was faltering at that. No, it wouldn't be long now. Help me, you fool! The apprentice frowned thoughtfully as the Inquisitor called out to him. That frown became steadily more pronounced as he realized what the backstabber intended. Ah, it seemed the Inquisitor was aware of him after all. And he wanted his help? After coming here to undo his mission? Oh, the gall! Pure, unmitigated gall! Still, he slid down the embankment and ignited one of his blades, the act of which caused the battle to briefly shift in the Inquisitor's favor. The fifth brother managed to retreat with a successful force push and all but hurried to his side, visibly favoring his right leg. Took you long enough, he rasped. Naruto wasn't having any of it. This is my mission. Why are you here? Your mission? I was the one who found them first. You scruffy-looking nerf herder. That's a load of bullshit. What is this, Sith? Shakti challenged, raising her blade. Reinforcements? Naruto smiled thinly at her. Something like that. It was becoming painfully clear to him that the fifth brother wasn't willing to cooperate with him, much less win the day. Worse, he had no one to blame but himself. His needlessly escalating events beyond their scope had been the catalyst for all of this, no doubt seeking to force a confrontation in an attempt to further elevate himself beyond his admittedly meager station. Naruto had no such desires. He was content in his post, and wished only to better the empire which he served. He killed where necessary and admittedly took some pleasure in several of those kills, but he liked to think he knew when to stop it, that there was at least one aspect that separated him from the power-hungry Inquisitors. The difference, you ask? Why, he was merciful, of course. Sorry. The fifth brother had only a moment to comprehend what was happening, to hear the angry thrum of a lightsaber, and realize the enormity of the blonde's betrayal. Not enough time to react, but just enough to stiffen in surprise. Then a blazing orange blade sprouted through his chest from behind as the blonde's remaining saber ignited, boring through flesh and bone. He hung there for a long moment, gaping wordlessly, gawping down at the searing amber line boring a thin hole through where his heart once lay. Now only a scorched hole in his chest awaited him, leaving him to choke on air that would no longer come. Golden eyes snapped towards him, wide with disbelief. You traitor! No! Naruto withdrew his weapon with a dark flourish, leaving the Inquisitor to stagger forward, falling to his knees with a choked scream. Not a traitor. My orders were to take the Jedi alive. Not dead, you idiot. Alive. You endangered those orders with your senseless pride. The Empire has no need for people like you. As its blade, his lightsaber cut down mercilessly on the man's throat. I release you. Shakti frowned. Aren't you a bit nice for an Inquisitor? That's slander. Naruto sniffed, kicking the Inquisitor's head away from the corpse. I like to think of myself as upstanding citizen of the Empire. Unlike you. You just killed your comrade. Maris choked out. Well, nobody's perfect. And he was anything but my ally. Really, I did the galaxy a favor. Now then. Still smiling, he raised his hands in an offering of peace, or what he hoped looked like it. I'm going to have to ask the two of you to come with me. He wasn't at all surprised when they ignited their sabers. Why do they always pick the hard way? Then they flew at him. The Force was alive. It was there in every blow struck against Vader's apprentice. It shrieked at him in every parry, whispered to him with every riposte, singing a song of battle to him as he took the offensive, guiding his hands and urging him onward to an unseen conclusion. Ever in flux was the future, hampering his ability to see, much less predict his opponents. For one moment the Empire's blade saw both women bowing to him in submission, in the next, he was speared to the ground upon the infallible blue pillar of Shakti's blade. Still another showed them all death, the planet burning as Admiral Constantine's fleet bombarded it from orbit. Try as he might, Naruto couldn't see the end of it. No one had told him it would be this difficult. Hampered by his orders to take them alive, he found himself on the defensive. Had he been allowed to kill them, this would have been far easier. If not for them, this battle would have ended hours ago. Spirits, he didn't want it to come to that. For there was no peace here on the planet of Felicia, no understanding between enemies and allies. Only violence. Brutal, uncivilized violence. No words of diplomacy here, no sounds save the spitting of sparks and the occasional grunt of exertion as the dark side and the light snarled at one another. Lightsabers clashed and shrieked and strove against one another, staining the grove in wild colors as their wielders collided violently in the light of the setting sun, came apart, only to collide again in a vivid spectrum of light. Curtains of crimson. Sheets of azure. Fans of jade. Naruto would have found it all hauntingly beautiful in its own way, if he weren't fighting for his life. Every second required his utmost concentration, for he stood perched on a razor's edge and the slightest slip promised disaster. Already his armor bore scorch marks where he'd failed to block in time, his arms aching from the effort of defending from so many angles at once. Bad enough that he had to face a Jedi Master in open combat where the terrain disfavored him, but her Padawan and that damnable cloak of hers was making the battle markedly more difficult. He hadn't thought it possible to use the Force in such a manner, let alone witness it firsthand. He was beginning to both envy and hate the technique, for it allowed her to harass him with her ability to vanish from his senses at will. Worse, Maris had since realized that she couldn't stand up to him in combat alone, so she'd taken it upon herself to harry him at every opportunity. Even now he saw her ripple out of sight in his peripherals, leaving him to wonder where she would next reappear. But there was no more time for thought, for Shakti was upon him again like a force of nature in her own right, a peerless and matchless warrior who refused to allow him time to think, much less seek a non-lethal end to their conflict. Luckily, thinking had never been Naruto's strong suit. Rather than maintain his blistering offense, as he had thus far and risk falling to a sneak attack, the Empire's blade gave ground willingly as the Togrutan descended on him anew, her blade a masterful flurry of strikes, harmlessly deflected or redirected by the red wall of his sabers. In her defense, Shakti wasn't old per se, in fact she was quite beautiful, but she certainly wasn't at her peak these days and it showed. For all her lean physique and vaunted skill she had fallen into the same trap as so many of her brethren. After all these years in hiding she neglected her training. He, however, was very much in his prime and had spent nearly every waking moment honing those skills under Darth Vader. Not a single day was wasted. If you weren't sleeping, you were training. If you weren't eating, you were training. If you weren't dead, you were training. It made a twisted sort of sense in a way that her skills had atrophied somewhat. What Jedi would devote time to the upkeep of their skills when the entire galaxy was hunting for them? Lightning crackled from his fingertips and arced outward, only to find itself abruptly redirected by the Jedi Master. That proved rather painful. Agony spasming through him, Naruto cut the torrent of power and slumped, groaning. "Alright, that's just not fair." Twirling a block from his knee, the blonde spun up to feint at her chest with one saber and thrust at her feet with the other, violently interposing his blade across the other. His speed must have startled her, because she shrank back again, giving ground. Naruto hesitated to follow her, though part of him longed for the chase and its inevitable conclusion. Still, why this sudden meekness on her part? Was she trying to lead him somewhere? He flung a cold volley of lightning after her, and was halfway through to chasing her when the angry snap hiss of another lightsaber filled his ears. Surprise! An angry voice hissed in his ear. "Now you die." His caution came too late as the Force roared a warning. "It's a trap." A blaze of pain shot through him as Maris pounced on him a heartbeat later, thrusting her twin lightsaber tunfas at his back with reckless abandon. Her technique was flawless, her body emerging from the Force cloak just under his guard, her sabers sweeping upward to strike at his unprotected spine. She'd put her very life on the line, poured all of her Force-enhanced speed and power into this moment. Under any other circumstance, and with any other, she might have succeeded in killing them then and there. Not so, the Empire's blade. Abandoning his lightsabers entirely, the blonde rounded on her faster than she thought possible, dropped to a knee, and caught the blades in his hands. Physically. Caught them. "What? Surprise yourself," Naruto ground out. The shock that flashed across the Padawan's visage pleased him more than words ever could. He could see it in her eyes and feel her fear. She'd expected to skewer the Sith from behind like a gun arc on a spit, not for him to drop his weapons and catch the energy blades with his unarmored hands. Even now he had her blades firmly bound at his side and in his fists, preventing her from extricating her precious weapons. Despite that very same fear, she still fought him, struggling to tear the weapons from his grasp and strike him down. "Do you really want me dead that badly?" Her only response was a growl. He owed his survival solely to Tudominus, a powerful energy absorption technique hammered into him by Vader with ruthless determination. He never thought he would ever be more grateful for one of the Dark Lord's teachings than he was now. The much-neglected skill had just saved his life, but it was something that required the utmost of concentration and not one he could use often. Even now, he could feel the blades trying to burn his hands, cut through his palms and render him powerless. He could only use the skill once a day without fail, but of course, Maris didn't know that. All she knew was that the Sith had just caught her weapons barehanded. "How did you?" Naruto grinned, forcing her sabers down. "Your power is insignificant compared to that of the dark side." In this instance, he deliberately said dark side rather than the Force itself, as he would have. Taunts had never been his forte, but like all things, Vader had drilled the importance of Danmachi into him at a young age. It was not a technique he took pleasure in by any means. Unlike most Sith, he did not relish the act of breaking his opponents, instead preferring to defeat them swiftly and soundly. If someone suffered the misfortune of being his enemy, and refused to be swayed from that course, then the least he could was grant them a quick death. But in situations such as these, when he was forbidden from killing his targets, the technique proved essential. Make your foe doubt themselves, their beliefs, their very intentions. Such things disrupt connections to the Force, and death soon follows. Time and time again his master had told him this, drilled it into him until it was second nature. If this served to end the battle without any casualties, all the better. Break an opponent, demoralize them, and the day was yours. But as with all things, Danmachi had its drawbacks. Sometimes, one pushed just enough. Sometimes you pushed too far. "I hate you!" Releasing her blades, the young Zabrak flung up her hands and shrieked at him, the Force gathering in her palms. Alarmed by the power he felt gathering there, Naruto discarded his grasp on her weapons and raised his own hand to meet the devastating blast he felt growing there, matching her power for power. For that much, he was prepared. He was not ready for the hate he found burning in those dark eyes. Caught between them, the Force shrieked and keened, growing strained and frayed as light and dark pushed against one another. Shakti chose that pivotal moment to enter the fray once more. Unlike her apprentice, Naruto noticed instantly. Lack subtlety, this one did. Scissoring Brood's legs out from under her, he called his blades back to him with a thought, and crossed them over his shoulders in a blazing X shape, parrying her behind his back. By contrast to the frenzied attack of her mad, invigorated apprentice, the Jedi Master's desperate assault barely registered as a blip on his radar. Truly, it was foolish of her to recklessly come within his reach without a plan, even with his attention focused on that of another. Once more the Force swelled around him, amplified by his emotions into solid form, blasting outward at those who thought to do him harm. The Force repulse slammed into both Jedi as one, ripping master and student from their feet as well as one another and flinging them to opposite ends of the grove. Again, he'd spared them. Battered and bruised, each Jedi climbed to their feet, but this time they proved far more wary than before. "And so, pride cometh before the fall." He paused, considering. "All right, that sounded way better in my head. Double the pride, twice the fall." Maris shot back with a hiss. Naruto nearly laughed despite himself. Her hate might be unsettling, but she certainly had fire. "We'll see how proud you are once I've beaten of you." By way of response she vanished again, and Shakti launched herself at him. "Are you enjoying yourself?" "I am." "You read my mind, Jedi." Sidestepping a narrow lunge, Darth Vader's apprentice caught the Jedi Master's blade on his rightmost weapon and forced it deep into the marshy ground with a sputtering hiss. The earth shuddered and he frowned in momentary confusion. Why would the earth shake? Then, even as Shakti struggled against the block, his head snapped forward, forehead jarring against hers in a vicious head, but that momentarily stunned her and shattered her concentration. Then his second saber was descending, howling an angry scarlet line toward her startled face. It would be a killing blow, quick and agile and sure to take her head right off. No! Remembering Vader's strict instructions, he narrowly averted the killing blow at the last instant, cutting through the thin leather straps that bound her bountiful breasts. Naruto realized his mistake a heartbeat later as his weapon swept past to graze the side of her neck. Oops. He certainly hadn't intended to be getting a look at those today. That got a reaction out of her, but not the one he'd expected. The flash of anger was quick and hot. Wholly unexpected. Shocked Ti's fist shot out in a streak of red, striking him hard in the face, sending stars shooting across his vision, and bloodying his nose. Then, while he still reeled, she cut fast and low at his knees with her blade, to which Naruto barely bound over the blazing blue line, immediately taking advantage of the momentary momentum of his leap and using it to slam both sabers down against hers in a crushing blow. The impact of the dual strike momentarily staggered the older Jedi, forcing her to her knee and turning the tide back into the apprentice's favor. "Master T, you disappoint me," he scoffed, bearing down on her. "Did you really think I'd fall for that trick? Nice punch, though. Do you truly wish to humiliate me, Sith?" she retorted over their crossed blades. "If so, I pity you." This close her crimson visage seemed to stain itself a bright shade of sapphire upon her blade. He imagined his own face was stained by the red of his blood just as much his own weapon. "I don't want to, no," Naruto growled out, refusing to relent. "But I have my orders and good soldiers follow them. Surrender! Never! Then you leave me no choice." Snarling, he flicked two of his fingers away from his leftmost hilt and a current of force lightning arced out to meet a reappearing Maris even as she tried to flank him. Caught unawares by the sudden deluge of raw energy, and either unable or unwilling to slow in time, the Zabrak raised her weapons. Even in that split second Naruto saw what she intended, recognizing her last, desperate attempt to catch the oncoming storm on one of her blades. An admirable attempt to be sure, but woefully foolish and an amateur one at that. One did not simply charge into a crate dragon's nest with that kind of plan. She might not live to regret that foolish decision. "Maris, don't!" Too late, Naruto realized with a pang of regret. Instead of being caught by her sabers as she no doubt intended, the Sith's, the powerful torrent tore through her meager defenses and found flesh. Maris's entire body spasmed as every muscle clamped down at once, her mouth opening in a voiceless scream, shoulders shaking uncontrollably as the dark side took her and flung her across the clearing. She landed, sprawled out in a heap some yards away, her skin steaming, tonfas dropping from nerveless fingers. Even from here, the Empire's blade could see the damage he'd done. "Monster!" Shocked Ti's gasp pained him, oddly enough, and he found himself leaning back, breaking the deadlock. He soon came to regret this act of mercy. Another flash of anger surrounded the Jedi Master in the Force, far more power than the last before being ruthlessly suppressed. The Force push that followed was anything but. It was only the barest of instincts that prevented him from being mowed down on the spot. Some sixth sense shrieked at him to move, and he flung himself aside as her hand snapped forward. Then came a great and terrible roar, and next he knew an invisible column of energy cannoned outward, flattening the ground, the trees, and any wildlife unfortunate enough to still linger there for miles in that direction. Naruto barely had an instant to glimpse it before he tumbled to his feet, before he found Shakti bearing down on him, lightsaber raised for a killing stroke. Her saber blurred down, and he moved to meet them, trading blows with her at a frightening pace. Alarmingly, he found that the tempo had changed. Left, right, parry, shunt, block, riposte. The sudden ferocity of her attack had him on the back foot despite his best efforts, her anger giving her surprising strength. Where was all this pent-up rage coming from? Had she truly been repressing her own emotions for so long that she was actually ga? A glancing blow on his shoulder painfully reminded him of the here and now. Forced into a retreat, he found himself slipping back into one of the more defensive lightsaber forms, Sorisu, rather than his more aggressive styles. He'd had to learn this particular form himself, for Vader disdained the very mention of it for reasons he refused to disclose. He was far from a master in this art, and painfully it showed. "Sorisu?" Shakti frowned, recognizing the style instantly as she cut and parried, driving him back. "You delayed the inevitable." Naruto didn't grace her with a reply. He was both the storm and its eye, that raging outer walls and the serene center. Drawing power from his passions, he fought fiercely in a tempered sort of restraint, refusing to allow his temper to slip its leash and lead him into a foolish trap. These weren't a pack of amateur Felicians whom he could bat aside with the flick of a wrist. These were Jedi who could easily take both life and limb from him if he wasn't careful. No matter how he might long to lash out, no matter the pull of the dark, he must not kill them. He remained determined to follow his orders. To remain calm. calm enough to see that this back and forth was getting him nowhere. Time to switch things up. As luck would have it, he happened to spy the fifth brother's fallen lightsaber nearby, still sprawled out near his corpse. Silently, he thanked Vader for thinking to instruct him in this particular form of combat. The Dark Lord was nothing if not thorough in his teachings. Yes, he decided, that would do nicely. Launching himself into a wild arc of scarlet, he dove past Shakti and repositioned his sabers, slamming both hilts of his sabers together to lock them into the form of a double-bladed saber. Before the Jedi Master could realize what he intended, he reached out with the Force and pulled with all his will, latching onto the fallen Inquisitor's saber. It flew to him like an arrow knocked from a bow, slapping home in the palm of his hand with a satisfying thud. Naruto frowned at its ungainly design, but it would serve his purpose for the time being. After a moment's fumbling, he thumbed it on and brought it to bear, quietly pleased. Now then, he purred. Let's try this again. Then, wielding both double-bladed sabers like twin staves, he launched himself at Shakti. The brief lull seemed to have sapped her rage somewhat, for instead of attacking, the Jedi wilted as he hammered at her defenses. Endless twists and circuits rained down on her from every conceivable angle, divided her attention between the two staves and their electrified blades. Naruto found himself too focused on maintaining such an onslaught to speak either. Controlling a single saber staff was difficult enough with two hands alone, but with his. She must have realized it as well, because her dropped, and she leaped away. Into the very pit they'd been circling all this time. Are you insane? Naruto reached out for her half-heartedly as she vanished from view, wondering if he should have done more. If his efforts had just prompted the Jedi to commit suicide. Had he pushed too hard? Too far, too soon? The idea that one would willingly take their life, just to get away from him. That fear vanished when Shakti rose up out of the pit, carried aloft by a towering serpentine appendage. Then another, and another still. Up they rose, higher and higher, looming over him, looking like something out of a bad horror movie. It wasn't until he felt the Jedi's controlling presence wrapped around him that he realized what he faced. It all made sense, now. The teeth he'd encountered, the way the ground seemed to tremble whenever he struck it. A Sarlacc pit, he realized. They'd been fighting around a bloody Sarlacc pit. It's over, Sith! Shakti's voice rang down at him, clear and proud. I have the high ground. Your power is useless to you now. Naruto twirled his staves, gauging the distance, considering. Surely he could make such a leap. Then he paused. A painful memory came to him unbidden, another harsh lesson from his master, one that had nearly cost him his life. He remembered making that foolish leap once before and nearly losing his life for his temerity. He remembered Vader telling him to never, ever be goaded into lunging at someone who'd claimed the high ground. Never to overestimate his own powers. The few times he'd been thrashed within an inch of his life. And here he'd been about to make that very same mistake. He could hear his master's voice, even now. Pride, boy. That is your greatest weakness. Take care that you don't choke on it. Inwardly, he cursed himself. Stupid, foolish boy. I ain't falling for that shit again, he declared firmly, hefting his stolen weapon. I've got a better idea. Catch. Catch? Doubtlessly, Shakti had thought he would give in and leap after her, thereby struck down by his own pride. She certainly wasn't expecting him to lob Inquisitor's saber at her like a discus. By the time she realized his intention, it was too late. By then the fifth brother's blade was already shrieking forward in a scarlet streak, intending to sever the massive feeding tentacles upon which she perched. He wasn't at all surprised when she flung her own saber to deflect it back at him. That, of course, was exactly the distraction he'd been waiting for. In that moment, that split second of inattention on her part, the Empire's Bald shunted his own weapons aside and raised his hands towards the heavens in silent benediction. This would be an effort like no other. Even against that rancor, he never used force lightning on such a scale. Fingers curled into claws, clenching as sparks danced between them, the full might of the dark side Naruto rushing through his veins. Stubbornly, he pushed back against it, unwilling to allow himself to be consumed by hatred. Tempered focus and anger perhaps, but not hate. Never hate. Shakti's surprise stabbed at him through the force like a knife, and she hurriedly bid the beast to crush him. But it was already too late. She was too far away to make a difference, and the Sarlacc too large and slow a target. In the very same instant that the monstrosity moved to smash him with one of its feeding tentacles, Naruto unleashed the storm. For a fleeting instant the darkness swallowed him and he experienced sheer euphoria, a strange sort of twisted awe for the primordial energies twisting and writhing within him. Lightning coursed from his palms, to the tentacles, then the gigantic worm itself, and the Jedi upon it. Gasping, she tried to redirect the dark side energies, but they proved too powerful, too widespread for her to return them to their master. Naruto growled at the fresh memory of feeling his own body cook inside his armor. You want power? Blue eyes blazed an eerie molten gold red as the storm raged through them, devouring beast and Jedi alike. I'll show you power! Unlimited power! Looking back, that was a horribly cliché line, spoken in the heat of the moment. He'd never hear the end of it from Cody. Meanwhile, shit! At that very moment, the commander was swearing endless imprecations to every deity he could possibly think of. And he knew quite a few. The fire shadow rocked around him like a ship caught in one of Kamino's great hurricanes, flung to and fro by those outside. Honed clubs of sharpened bone beat against the ship's hull with increasing regularity and frequency, coupled by the occasional roar of a wild beast. The former he didn't fear in any large capacity, for they couldn't truly do any real damage beyond scuffing the hull and scratch the paint. It was the rancor that worried him. By the force, that was one big son of a… Oh no! He growled, squeezing the trigger. No, you don't! Get! Twin arcs of green light shot outward from turret at the shadow's underbelly, carving deep trenches into the cliffside. One such shot grazed the beast, to which it shot him a dark glower. Still, relentlessly it came on, ignoring his shots until the turret could no longer turn to track the beast. Damn it! Abandoning the turret, Cody scrambled up the ladder and hastily reached into his belt. Thumbing the comm link that had been left behind for him, he keyed up the blonde's frequency. Kid? He whispered, keeping his voice low. I know you're probably busy, but I could really use some help here. Static answered. Lovely. A heavy blow shook the fire shadow anew, nearly throwing him to the deck. Now what? Discarding his comm, the clone clambered back to the bridge. What he saw there turned his blood cold. Even from the shredded viewport he could see the great, hulking beast plodding forwards in spite of its wounds, physically pushing the ship with both claws. Slowly, inevitably, spurred on by its rider, the gargantuan beast was making progress, shoving the fire shadow towards the very edge he'd been so wary of parking the ship nearby. He didn't want to think of what might happen if that beast succeeded. He'd raised the shields, but if something that large started pounding on them for too long, he wasn't sure how the little vessel would hold out. Worse, it might actually succeed in pushing the ship off the cliff, and then where would they be? Well, he would be dead, that much was certain. Really, he had no one to blame but himself for his misfortune. Stay with the ship, Cody, the kid had said. Be sure and lock the ramp, he'd said. You'll be safe, he said. More fool, he'd forgotten about the Kriffing natives. Shortly after Naruto's ill-advised airdrop, Cody had been forced to ignore his first landing zone because of them, abandoning a sturdy-looking bit of fungus for a distant cliff overlooking Felicia's forests. It had seemed safe enough and out of the way, at the time. Needless to say, he'd been duped. Somehow, someway, the natives had managed to get the drop on him when he wasn't looking. Sloppy Cody? He admonished himself, you should know better. He'd been out of the field for too long. Under any other circumstance, he would have simply taken off again. But that big bastard back there had clipped a fuel line. Now he found that amidst the press of bodies he no longer had that option. They were bold now, no longer frightened by the ship's weapons either. Warning shots did nothing but cause the Felicians to scatter, and they'd since learned the range of them. Clever little bastards had even managed to tie the ship down with some goo-like substance, so escape, even if he could prime the engines, wasn't an option anymore, either. Now, it seemed he was going to have to fight his way out with nothing more than his blaster rifle and a couple grenades in his belt. He didn't envy his chances. If Naruto didn't come back soon. A white-purple flare of lightning from the viewport answered him. If he could see something like that from all the way up here. Well, that's not good. No backup then? Cody sighed. There were worse ways to go, he supposed. Death in the line of duty was something to be admired, at any rate. He'd wanted nothing more than to be back in the field, and he'd gotten his wish. He had his youth and vigor back for one last mission, one final task to help an old friend. He just hadn't expected to go out like this. It seemed too abrupt an end to what he'd envisioned as a clean slate, a fresh start from retirement with the galaxy at his feet. The kid would be sad to see him go, but he'd understand, surely. Still, if this was to be his end, he was going to take some of those bastards with him. Steeling himself, the clone commander shouldered his rifle, prepared to make for the ramp, and the world shook. This was a different manner of tremor than the last. The ground beneath his feet seemed to physically flinch as though someone had dealt it a mighty blow. Not a moment later, the relentless grind of the fire shadow's backward slide ceased. There was a commotion outside now, a chattering of voices he didn't understand. The natives, no doubt. But why had they stopped? It didn't make any sense. Had the kid come back already? A stray glance toward the rear viewport confirmed that, yes, the spectacle of lightning was still raging well below the cliff. So who? These EZM. Even after all these years, Cody still recognized the telltale sound of a lightsaber's ignition. For a fleeting instant he was back on Utapu, handing General Kenobi his lightsaber, only to fire on him and watch the man plummet to his death minutes later. Then he shook himself, and he was back in the present. Peering down through the front viewport, marred with slime as he was, he saw something. Someone. From there, he could just glimpse a figure in black. Though he couldn't see them from this angle, he could certainly hear the commotion from without. The Felucians were openly shouting at the stranger now in their native tongue, nonsensical gibberish turning shrill tinged with distress and fear. This had no effect on the interloper whatsoever. They simply leveled their weapon at the natives and stalked forward at them, vanishing beneath the fire shadow's armored underbelly. Yet again the sound of the saber rang out, once, twice, thrice, 7 times in all, and their shouts were reduced to dying groans. Their rancor roared then, its cry a sharp, plaintive note that cut off in an abrupt squeal. The silence that followed soon proved itself suffocating. It was quiet. Too quiet. Cody was only just considering venturing out to see what was going on when the ship shuddered, startling him. Well, well, well. A woman's smug voice echoed off the hull. Aren't you going to let me in? Never mind, I'll do it myself. He was even more startled when the ramp inexplicably swung down of its own accord, granting admittance to his savior. Framed against the light, they strode up the ramp at an easy pace, pausing to take in the interior of the vessel. Revealed was a slender young woman with long, flowing dark hair, her body clad in a form-fitting black uniform, and eyes the color of darkness and poisoned honey. She was certainly beautiful if you went for crazy, although the slight, satisfied and utterly insufferable smirk etched into her sinister green face seemed to hint at knowing something more. None of these things mattered to Cody. It was the red, double-bladed lightsaber that drew his attention. An inquisitor. Sitspit. Hello, Commander. The seventh sister purred with a silken smile, her manner smooth as cream. Can Naruto come out to play? Near the ancient abyss. Fall! Master and beast alike screamed anew as the powerful current took hold of them once more, countless volts crawling across their seizing bodies and rendering them insensate. Made helpless by the storm, they could only writhe. Even then, Naruto refused to relent. He felt their pain and drew strength from it, further fueling his powers and the raw currents coursing through him. He knew that to relent too soon meant death. The Sarlacc would doubtlessly strike out at him in a rage the moment it was free, and after such an attack, he would be in no position to defend. Still, Shak Ti's cries made him feel wretched. With the dark side in full sway, it would have been so easy to simply keep pummeling them thus, to continue without a second thought, and char her to ash alongside her pet. To just kill them both and be done with. No. This wasn't the way. Chastising himself for that sudden slip, he lowered his hands and cut himself off from the heady power pulsing at his fingertips. Orders aside, he wasn't that sort of person and found himself mildly repulsed that he'd actually wanted to make her suffer. With all he had, he pulled himself back from the brink and let the lightning gutter out. Truly the force must have truly been with Shak Ti, because not only did she survive, but managed to catch herself as she fell. A tumbling roll and she was down, slowly climbing to her feet, hurt, but alive. Her pet, however, was not so fortunate. A low, piteous warble and the sight of those drooped tentacles told him all he needed to know. In protecting Shak Ti it had suffered the brunt of his assault. Now it paid for that with its life. A shame. He'd not considered the creature sentient until this moment, nor had he ever thought an overgrown worm could be noble. Despite all his training he took no pleasure in killing animals, no matter how mindless or grotesque they might seem. The Sarlacc had been neither of these apparently, to which a rare thorn of sorrow pricked him and held him back. Inclining his head to the deceased creature, The Empire's bald sketched a small bow and offered the only words he knew. They tasted stale and hollow in his mouth. "I'm sorry," he apologized. Then he returned his attention to Shakti. "Are you happy now, Master Jedi?" His words warped into a growl, temper slipping its leash as he stalked towards her, saber spinning. "Am I the monster you think me to be? You've made me butcher your warriors, maim your apprentice, and now kill your pet. Pray I don't do the same to you. Surrender and end this foolishness." She raised her head at his approach, panting. "I will not yield," Naruto snarled. "Imbecile!" He didn't give her time to utter any more of her inane drivel, sweeping his double-bladed staff down at her face. Startled by the sudden ferocity of his assault and the genuine anger behind it, Shakti only narrowly blocked the blow and immediately stumbled for her efforts. Naruto pounced on this fresh weakness and pushed the Togrutan Jedi back and away from the pit. Now it was Tea who found herself firmly on the defensive once more, her flagging speed barely enough to evade his wild swings. But she wasn't beaten. Not yet. Even in her battered state, and with her strength failing, the Togrutan Jedi managed one last wild lunge, clipping the southern end of his staff and rendering its blade useless to him with a shower of sparks. Enraged, the blonde discarded the powerless half of his weapon and aimed a vicious crosscut at her chest. He realized his mistake a heartbeat later. Weakened as she was by the onslaught of Force lightning, Shakti was too weary to resist him any longer. Their battle had dragged on for far too long, her immense reserves too taxed to maintain the strength needed to face him. Against his raging offense her guard held for but a moment longer before it broke, and she made a fatal mistake, blocking high, when he struck low. Naruto instinctively hammered down against this mistake relentlessly, forcing her arm out, further and further to the left, until, arg! His blade sliced through her wrist. For the first time since the battle had begun, Shakti dropped her composure and blade both, crumpling to the ground with a choked scream. Her blade sailed up and Naruto caught it even as sank to her knees to try and clutching at the ruined remains of her severed wrist. Scowling, he levered both sabers red and blue beneath her chin in a scissoring formation. Shakti went still. A single tug would be all it took to remove her head, and she knew it. "You are beaten!" he hissed, panting. "It's useless to." "Master!" Batting aside Master Ti's clumsy lunge for her hilt, the apprentice spun and drove an armored boot into her torso, hurling her away just in time to see Maris emerge from her force cloak. Impossibly she'd risen yet again, her fractured lightsaber tonfas blazing a murderous green circle at his face. Instinct snarled at him, and his body snapped backward just in time, nearly laying itself horizontal to the ground to avoid the blow. Instead of taking his head as their owner had doubtlessly intended, the hot sting of her jaden blades hissed across the bridge of his nose in an angry red line, scarring him, but sparing his life. Pain, anger, hatred. Why didn't they give up? Waves upon waves of wrath fueled him and he snarled, a telekinetic thrust ripping the Zabrak from her feet to cannon her into her master. They collided violently, tumbling into the dirt, and he had to forcibly restrain himself from giving chase as the dark side sang in his veins. He resisted it with only the greatest of efforts. Instead, the Empire's blade climbed slowly to his feet, rubbing his newest scar ruefully. "No more," he declared as he rose, casting Brood's weapons aside into the abyss with a thought. "You're beaten. Surrender peacefully and you'll be spared. Don't make me destroy you." "Destroy us?" Shakti ground out through clenched teeth against her own agony. "Who are you to say such things? We fight for peace." Naruto chuckled bitterly. "Jedi peaceful? Ha! That would be the day. What kind of a fool did she take him for? Then tell me this, Master T, how are Jedi peacekeepers if they fight in galactic wars? How can they say that emotions are forbidden, when they know that you can't stop yourself or others from having them? And how can the Jedi say that they don't form attachments, when each and every one of them know that they form attachments with either their men, friends, and even fellow Jedi? None of them could be called peacekeepers if they fight in a war and take people's lives. None of them could stop someone from having emotions, because emotions are what separates living beings from droids. And now the part that shows how the Jedi Code makes the order weak. If you don't form attachments, then what is there to fight for? If you die, what would it have been worth? If you don't have something to protect, fight for, or die for, then who would remember you? It isn't balance. Might as well program lightsaber fighting forms into droids. The Jedi are so cold, unfeeling, and indifferent. The Jedi believed in utter detachment and complete emotionless as a state of being, Yet without attachment, there's nothing to produce a sense of loyalty. Without emotion, you have no regard for the lives of others since you lack things like compassion or guilt. Yet in spite of that, the Jedi are supposed to have morality? How? How can you expect something that lacks emotions to care for the lives of others? How can you know that something without attachments won't betray you or anyone else since they can't develop loyalties? How can you have something like that, yet expect it to possess morality and keep others safe? You can't. The female Togruta Jedi Master frowned at that. This wasn't what she expected. A philosophical debate with a Sith assassin about the nature of the Jedi Code? Unheard of. Seeing Maris staring at the young Sith assassin in shock over what he just said did not help put the Jedi Master at ease. She sighed, hardening her features. You are Vader's slave. But your power is wasted with him. You could be so much more. Naruto smirked bitterly. I already know I'm my master's weapon. I lay waste to all that stands in his path. All I know is the ways of the Empire. I've never been anything else. And what would there be in turning on the only thing I've ever known? And all for what? A dead order that discarded their hearts in the name of power, failed at ensuring security of their members, or allegiance to the Force instead of governing bodies? After all, that's why Mace Windu tried to kill the Emperor back when he was a Chancellor and take over the Old Republic for himself as the mastermind for and during the Jedi Rebellion that made you Jedi have to be put down. Shakti frowned at that. As much as she didn't much like him being spoken ill of, she couldn't deny that Mace Windu had possessed his faults. Mace Windu had a unique personality for a Jedi. He was serious, noted for his grim demeanor, and very cautious, to the point of occasional reluctance, a careful chooser of his friends, being slow to trust or being mistrustful. Despite this, he was highly compassionate and extremely brave, as he willingly risked life and limb many times to protect the people of the Republic, as well as his fellow Jedi and even the clone troopers under his command. He also firmly believed in the role of the Jedi as the Republic's servants, and displayed a fierce dedication to the Jedi Order and the Galactic Republic alike. A staunch traditionalist, Mace was long regarded as the great champion of the Jedi Order. However, despite these positive traits, Mace was also rather arrogant and self-righteous. He was perhaps even a little too confident in his own abilities, and saw very little fault in the Jedi or the Republic, believing they were always in the right and everyone else was in the wrong. He was prideful, known to be outspoken, occasionally sarcastic, and was largely obstinate to anything that contradicted his views. However, he kept his arrogance in check for the most part. He was humble towards individuals he believed were superior to him, such as Yoda, and treated most civilians and fellow Jedi with respect. Despite this, Mace didn't always hold his arrogance in check. He was shown to be somewhat cold, arrogant and dismissive towards individuals he believed were inferior to him, most notably fellow Jedi Qui-Gon Jinn, Anakin Skywalker and Ahsoka Tano, all of whom he distrusted and treated with little respect despite them all being exceptionally powerful Force users, skilled lightsaber duelists, strong characters and loyal members of the Jedi Order in their own rights. As a Jedi, Mace was intelligent and wise. However, he was somewhat short-sighted, as he had a habit of underestimating the younger generation of Jedi, nor did he realize that his constant mistrust, lies and deceit towards Anakin were slowly turning him against the Jedi Order. When Ahsoka was accused of treason and murder, Mace was unable to see that she had actually been framed and was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. During Ahsoka's trial, Mace took his distrusting nature too far, to the point where he openly accused Ahsoka of lying to the Jedi Council and then coldly decided to strip her of her status as a Jedi and turn her over to the Republic military, an act that, to Shakti's shame, most of the other council members agreed with. After learning of her innocence, Mace joined the council in offering to reinstate Ahsoka into the Jedi Order, but instead of taking responsibility for his actions, he claimed that Ahsoka's traumatic experience had been nothing more than a test given to her by the Force. When Ahsoka left the Order for good, Mace, unlike the others who were very sad to see her leave, only seemed disgusted. As she walked away, he frowned and his fists clenched. That was because he was not only incapable of acknowledging or learning from his mistakes, but he was also incapable of apologizing or admitting when he was wrong. Ultimately, Mace's true motivation for all he did was a divergence from Jedi philosophy, as his personal belief system was an extremist viewpoint of peace at all costs. In his mind, peace was created by only one thing, civilization, and he viewed the Republic as the ultimate and only true civilization in the entire galaxy, thus developing an attachment towards the institution, and leaving him with a willingness to do anything to preserve the Republic, even if it meant violating the Jedi Code. Small wonder why the Empire would scapegoat someone like that for regicide. Still, that didn't mean she agreed with him entirely. Do you truly despise the light that much? Naruto offered only a frown. Look, nothing personal, but my mission is to capture you alive, Master T. Extinguishing his sabers, he returned them to his belts. If I don't do this or if I fail, the Empire will bombard the planet from orbit. Please, just surrender and come quietly. Shakti stared. Shocked. Both at the Empire's tactics, as well as the genuine horror and remorse at the sheer idea of such an event happening, her young opponent held. She looked up, thrusting her senses upwards with the force, alarmed when she discovered he was right. She looked back at the boy, truly taking time to register his appearance for the first time. His wild blonde hair that stood up all over like the spines of a sea urchin, those trio of pencil-thin, groove-like markings that resembled whiskers on each cheek. The fresh scar on his nose, carved into him by Marisa's last, desperate attack. His immersion in the dark side of the Force seemed to physically reflect through his pale skin and the luminous, sulfuric yellow of his eyes. And yet, when she looked deeper, she saw light. I see mercy and fairness, she murmured in disbelief, unable to believe what she was sensing. And perhaps, compassion? Your actions reflect darkness, yet also light? You claim to be an agent of the dark side, but it's a mask? What is this? Who are you? That can't be, Maris interjected, forcing herself off her hands and knees. Sith embody pure evil. It's a trick. She glowered at him fiercely, uncertain. You're lying. I am what I am, Naruto replied wearily, folding his arms before his battered chest. I can't claim to be anyone or anything else. Let my actions speak for me. I had ample opportunity to kill you both multiple times, but I didn't. Despite, I might add, several sneak attacks on your part, Hornhead. Maris balked. Hornhead? You heard me, the blonde retorted cheekily. Now stay down, or I'll have to zap you again. There it was again. There was mercy in his every action. For all his goading and taunting, he'd yet to end them. Even though it was well within his power, still he held back. Nor had he tried to turn them to the dark side as she'd expected he might. His pleas for their surrender were heartfelt. Genuine. Shakti looked at him, realization dawning. You're a light Sith. Naruto froze. I'm not a light Sith. You're a light Sith. What the hell is a light Sith anyway? In spite of her wounds, Shakti felt herself smile. Must you deflect everything with humor? It's how I cope with difficult shit, alright? The apprentice sighed, pinching the brow of his nose. Ow. Shit, that hurts, he hissed, flinching as he reached down for her ruined palm. Look, I don't know what a light Sith is, but can we please call an end to this already? I'd like to be able to reattach your hand while we still can, you know. Shakti colored. What guarantee do we have that you won't kill us the moment we lower our guard? Brood challenged hotly. Naruto arched an eyebrow, mildly offended. Other than the fact that I could have killed you already? Sith. Fine. You have my word. He swore. No harm will come to you while you are in my custody. So do I swear by the Force. Not the dark side? Shakti posited curiously. The Force is the Force, Jedi. Naruto snapped, refusing to fall for the jab. Dark and light. Now, do we have an accord? How strange. I sense you are sincere. She saw only one path out of this. Only one course that didn't end with her death and the planet in ashes, its people slaughtered. Had it been her alone, she would have gone to her death willingly. But with Marisa's life, no, the life of everyone on this planet dangling in the balance the line, what other option did she have? If she yielded to him now, she could change her mind and possibly that of her captor later, she told herself. If she survived. If the Sith held true to his word. If Vader didn't slay her on the spot. If Sidious didn't order their execution. So many ifs. So many risks, and yet. Naruto blinked as she knelt before him. We submit. Teach us your ways. Awkward silence followed. For but a moment. And then. Several long minutes later. It was a tired and ramshackle group that finally found their way back to the fire shadow some time afterward. Their trek proved slow going indeed, for the Jedi's wounds had truly begun to manifest themselves as had Naruto's own. He'd sustained lightsaber wounds in dozens of areas, suffered burns from having his own Force lightning redirected at him by Shakti, fractured a few ribs, and judging by the intense pain radiating from his left leg, broken something. Likely his armor was all that held him together at the moment, even as his regeneration struggled to put him back together. What's taking so long, Sith? My name is Naruto, not Sith. Pausing to peel back a branch for them, the blonde shot his charges a dark glower. Stop calling me that! Shakti herself had grown quite pale, and he suspected she'd pushed her own body to the breaking point against him. Perhaps he'd overdone it with the lightning. In fact, he was almost certain he had. The loss of her hand wasn't helping, and she looked as though she'd go into shock at any moment. But by will alone she shouldered on, politely nodding as she ducked beneath the branch he'd moved for her. By contrast, Maris was faring far better, though she favored her right side and hissed like a cat at him whenever he came too close. He suspected the last part had more to do with shocking her one too many times than any actual injury. Honestly, how could he weasel that force cloak technique out of her when she was being so hissy? Brood, he groused. More like broody. I heard that. Bah! Still, they managed to reach his ship just before the sun dipped over the horizon, its last fading rays of light lingering to guide their way. It would have proved far easier if Cody hadn't parked the ship on such a high ridge, but beggars couldn't be choosers, he supposed. Judging by the dead Felucians surrounding the craft, he'd had to fight to keep it there at all. There was even a dead rancor sprawled out near the cliff. He'd really have to ask how his old commander had managed to take down one of those by himself as he brought up the rear. A prickling sensation in the force was his only warning. Not so much a shriek of danger as alerting him to the presence of another dark side wielder. As such, he wasn't entirely surprised when a shadow detached itself from the underbelly of the ship and crept up behind him. By then, he was perfectly aware of the seventh sister well before she flung her arms around his neck and spooned him from behind. Naruto sighed, knowing better than to try fighting her off, and the ruckus that would undoubtedly ensue. If she wanted to make a scene, then by all means she was welcome to it later, but why did it have to be here and now? She always did have a penchant for the worst timing. You're not supposed to be here. He sighed, the words a whisper as the dark curtain of her hair tickled his face. But you know that, don't you? Bad boy. She cooed into his ear, ignoring him. Going off on a hunt and not telling me, hogging all the glory for yourself, toying with your prey. I had my orders. Come on, get off already. Ha! You'll have to make me, Blade. Shakti and Maris. Not so much. With their senses muddled by the dark side, the Jedi weren't aware of the Inquisitor until she revealed herself with that delighted shout. As one they spun. Well, Shakti tried to turn, but managed little more than half of a revolution before her weakness got the best of her. Maris proved herself more spry, rounding on the smug Darksider with a scowl. Another one? Poor Jedi, you didn't even notice me until I let you. Had they still possessed their blades, they would have drawn them on the spot. It seems you've gone soft, Naruto. Stepping away from him, the Inquisitor ignited her blade. Perhaps I should put these two out of their misery. Never, Sith. Wait. Sensing the oncoming conflict, Naruto flung up a hand in both directions. Let's all calm down. No attacking. They're my prisoners. I gave my word. The seventh sister sulked. You're no fun. Neither are you, always trying to steal my prey. He sighed as she deactivated her blade. Do I even have to ask why you're here? I was in the area. She looked away, refusing to meet his gaze. Don't make me use your name. All right. The seventh sister wilted under his stare with a glower. Stupid spoilsport. I hunted you down so I could brag, really. Thus beaming, she reached behind her back and retrieved what appeared to be a slender-looking pike from her back. She seemed to take a sadistic pleasure in activating the weapon, bathing the night in blue relief. Behold the famed weapon of Kazdan Paradis, slain on Raxus Prime by my hand. Maris groaned and hid her face. No. Oh yes. You should have heard him scream. It was glorious. A withering look from Naruto silenced her boast. That still doesn't answer my question. Neither did you. The seventh sister replied coyly, all but batting her eyelashes at him as she extinguished her trophy and once more bound it to her back. And if not for me, your precious ship would be a flaming ruin at the bottom of this abyss. In any case, our beloved fifth brother mysteriously vanished a few hours ago in this system. You wouldn't happen to know anything about that, would you, Blade? Naruto swiftly mastered himself. Nope. Never heard of him. Oh? The seventh sister grinned, sensing the subtle revelation in his words. If he doesn't exist as you say, it would seem a promotion is in order for me. Fifth sister. She cocked her head, sounding her new title out. Doesn't quite have the same ring to it as seventh, but it'll do. Sneaky, clever little thing. Alright, that's enough. I appreciate you helping Cody, but… Cody? Shocked he, silent and grieving until this very moment, perked up at the mention of the clone's name. Commander Cody? The one and the same. A soft voice from the ramp caused all eyes to turn towards the Fire Shadows ramp. Naruto wasn't surprised to find Cody there, crouched near the hatch as though he expected to be attacked at any moment. Shocked, he pushed past him, her gentle face replete with sorrow. Cody! The clone looked away, radiating guilt. It's good to see you in one piece, General. His gaze flicked to the stump of her wrist, pained. Well, mostly. Abruptly, his visage hardened. But that's not why I'm here. Steeling himself, the commander stood and briskly marched past his former allies. Thought not, Naruto noticed, without a supreme effort. He wasn't expecting his old friend to stop before him and press a small hollow projector into his palm. Cody, what is? Transmission coming in for you, kid. Might want to take this in private. Who is it? Oh, no one important, just the Emperor. Maris hissed furiously. Naruto bolted upright. Come again? Before he could finish, the clones stormed away, and the Jedi were making themselves scarce inside the ship. That was one conversation Naruto was more than happy to be excluded from. Judging by Maris's vocal protests, it was going to be a loud one at that. Well? The seventh sister inquired. Aren't you going to answer? He'd never seen the man in person before, much less spoken to him. That the great Palpatine himself would deign to speak with him was something of an honor. A privilege, really. It would allow him to meet the Mighty One and make his own assumptions. From what he understood, he was Vader's master, and that he was responsible for the safety and upkeep of the Empire. But that was where his admittedly limited knowledge ended. It would behoove him to broaden his horizons and the rule of the galaxy for himself, he decided. He wasn't expecting the image of a wizened old man in dark robes, more so as he found himself face to face with the small hologram. Ah, we meet at last. Leaning on a cane as he was, he seemed surprisingly small, almost frail, even. Ancient eyes peered past him. And I see the seventh sister has completed her own task as well. Good, good. Lord Vader speaks most highly of your accomplishments, my boy. He sounded most kind, like a doting grandfather. He did? That left Naruto slightly taken aback. Indeed. Tell me, have you completed your mission? Are the traitorous Jedi dealt with? They have submitted to me, yes. Naruto admitted warily, before the seventh sister could otherwise interject. I plan to return to Vader on Mustafar for my next task. Do as you will. Afterward, I require your presence in the Lahal system. It has been rife with strife as of late, and requires a steady hand to restore order. See to it that they are eliminated. Eliminated? But surely we can find another way. Palpatine frowned. For a moment there, he thought he had seen something lurking beneath that kindly facade. As if the mere mention of his master had stirred something in the Emperor. Whatever it was, it vanished before he could read into it, replaced by that eerie, calm expression. Something inside Naruto quailed at it, instinctive obedience compelling him to obey. Fear. How long had it been since he'd felt that? That old, cold dread. It will be as you say. He inclined his head in subservience. Yes, yes, excellent. The Emperor rasped in approval. I expect great things from you, my boy. Continue your efforts, and together, we will bring peace and stability to the Empire. That was the problem with emotions, you blushed readily. I won't let you down. Palpatine smiled. I'm certain you won't. With that, the transmission ended in a stutter of blue. Naruto's smile faded and he closed his hand over the hollow projector until he felt it begin to fracture, then crack. Metal and plasteel bent beneath his grip and still he squeezed. Uncaring as sparks spit between his grasp and singed his fingers, he didn't release his hold on the projector until it was a mangled mess of wires and circuitry in his hands. What he saw there unnerved him. A dark, nameless dread began to take root in him. His hand trembled. He understood that he was a weapon, a tool, a blade, but just now, for him to actually feel fear, to be told to kill all who opposed him, innocent or not. Lahal, the seventh sister hummed, heedless of his inner turmoil. Excellent. This is going to be glorious. Perhaps. Naruto conceded. I'll see you there then. So you shall. She grinned wickedly, retreating. Try not to torment the Jedi too much while I'm gone. No promises. One final laugh, a startling, lingering kiss, and she was gone. The Empire's blade muttered a half-hearted farewell and watched her make her way to her own craft, looking on as it cleared the horizon. When he was certain she was gone, he took Shak Ti's lightsaber from his belt and held it up in his hand, considering her words. A light Sith. What did that mean? Regardless, it was a fine blade, and would serve as an admirable replacement for the one he'd lost. Red and blue. Dark and light. Passion and tempered morality. Was this how others saw him? As something between light and dark? He did not feel a pull to the light in a true sense of the word, but neither did he think to shun it. For all their flaws and crimes, the Jedi were still wrong. Or so he had been led to believe. Were they right? And if so, did that make Vader? No, he refused to dwell on that. To dwell was to think of impossible things, horrible haunting thoughts that ate at him like worms. Whatever the case, he needed to return to Mustafar and make his report, as well as deliver the Jedi to Vader. From there, he would follow his master's will and try to take solace in the purpose it gave him. After a moment's pause, he started towards the fire shadow and the voices within. All the while, doubt gnawed at him. Chapter end.
Now watch daily exclusive and censored lemon stories and mature content. Access all this and more on my Patreon. Click the link in the description to explore.